It will cost $200,000 to fix.
No, I can fix it for much less. This 14-cent washer is all it needs.
They told her it would cost $200,000 to fix 8 cars. She almost signed the check. But something, call it instinct, call it doubt, call it whatever you want, made her stop. She made one phone call instead, to a mechanic nobody had heard of, a guy running a struggling shop out of a strip mall on the south side of Chicago. A single dad with grease under his fingernails and a chip on his shoulder the size of a transmission. What he found under that hood didn't just fix the cars. It blew open a scandal that had been buried for years. This is that story. Stay with me until the end. And drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this one travels. The morning Liam Parker's life changed, he was lying on a cold concrete floor arguing with a 2019 pickup truck that refused to make sense. It was a Tuesday in early November and the shop was barely warm. The space heater in the corner made a noise like a dying animal every time it clicked on, and the overhead fluorescent, the third one from the left, had been flickering for 6 weeks because Liam kept forgetting to buy a replacement bulb. He'd stuck a piece of electrical tape over the end of it to cut down on the strobing. It didn't work great, but it worked enough. The pickup belonged to a guy named Gerald, who drove it for his landscaping business and needed it back by Thursday at the absolute latest. Gerald had explained this 4 times. Liam had nodded 4 times. He understood. Gerald's livelihood was sitting in his bay, and that mattered. What didn't make sense was why a truck with fresh spark plugs, a clean fuel system, and a battery that tested at full charge was throwing a misfire code every 45 minutes like clockwork. Not random, not weather-related. Every 45 minutes. Liam had been chasing it since 8 that morning, and it was now past 11, and the only thing he was sure of was that the obvious answer was wrong. He preferred it that way, actually. The obvious answer being wrong was where most of his work lived. Liam. His name came from the direction of the front office, which was really just a repurposed storage room with a desk, a coffee maker, and a wall calendar from 3 years ago that nobody had bothered to take down. The voice belonged to Marcus Webb, his one full-time employee, a 26-year-old from the South Side who had more raw instinct about engines than most people twice his age, but who still texted during diagnostic work, which drove Liam insane. "Phone," Marcus called. "Says it's important." They all say it's important. She sounds like she means it. Liam rolled out from under the truck. He was wearing a gray thermal under his work shirt, and both knees of his pants had permanent stains from years of exactly this. Cold floors, engine grease, the particular indignity of being a man who worked with his hands in a world that didn't always value it. He stood, grabbed a shop rag from the workbench, and wiped his hands on the way to the office. The rag didn't do much. It never did. He picked up the phone. "Parker's Auto," he said. A pause. Then, "Is this Liam Parker?" The voice was precise, not cold exactly, but controlled in the way that people who make decisions for a living tend to be controlled. Efficient, like every word was intentional. "That's me," he said. "My name is Sophia Sterling. I was given your number by a former colleague of yours, someone who said you were the best diagnostic technician he'd ever worked with." Another pause, shorter this time. "I'm going to be honest with you, Mr. Parker. I'm not sure I believe that yet, but I'm running out of options, so here we are." Liam sat down in the desk chair. It wheeled slightly to the left, the way it always did, and he put his foot out to stop it. "What's the problem?" 8 vehicles, she said. 8 identical luxury SUVs. Meridian Executives, 2022 models. All part of my company's client transportation fleet. All of them developed the same electronic warning situation within the last 10 days. Dashboard lights, system errors, the vehicles going into what the manufacturer calls a restricted performance mode. All 8? All 8, within 10 days of each other. Liam didn't say anything for a moment. He was already thinking. 8 identical vehicles, identical failure mode, narrow time window. That wasn't random failure. Random failure didn't work like that. Random failure was spread out, varied, individual. What she was describing had a pattern underneath it, and patterns meant a cause that could be found. "Who diagnosed them first?" he asked. "Hargrove Automotive Group," she said, "on Michigan Avenue. They've serviced my fleet since I purchased the vehicles." He knew the name. Of course he knew the name. He'd worked there for 4 years. He'd learned more in those 4 years than in all his automotive education combined. About engines, about service operations, and about the way certain businesses treated the truth when it was inconvenient. He kept his voice neutral. What was their recommendation? Complete replacement of the central electronic control modules on all 8 vehicles, she said, plus associated wiring harness inspection, recalibration, and labor. And the estimate? A beat. $200,000. The number sat there in the air of his small office like something physical. He stopped himself before he said what he was actually thinking. That's a significant estimate. It is, Sophia said. And I'll tell you something, Mr. Parker. I've been in business long enough to know when a number is designed to make me stop asking questions. This number feels that way. She paused. So I stopped and started asking different questions instead. What do you want from me? I want you to look at one of the vehicles, just one. I'll have it delivered to you tomorrow morning. If you can find what's actually wrong, if there's something actually wrong, I'll pay your diagnostic rate, whatever it is. No argument. If you tell me Hargrove is right, I'll believe you and I'll sign their paperwork. Liam leaned back in the chair. Through the glass partition between the office and the main bay, he could see Marcus leaning over the engine compartment of a Honda, phone in hand, probably looking at a forum post about something. He should say something about the phone. He kept forgetting to say something about the phone. Can I ask you something? Liam said. Sure. Why me? Specifically, me? The answer came without hesitation, which told him she'd already thought about it. Because the person who gave me your name told me you'd been fired from Hargrove 2 years ago. He told me you fought with management over a safety issue and lost. He said if anyone would look at those vehicles without any loyalty to how they've been diagnosed, it would be you. She paused. And because you're not a dealership, you don't have a corporate relationship to protect. Liam was quiet for a moment. Through the window at the front of the shop, he could see the neighborhood. A laundromat, a discount grocery, a bus stop where an old man sat reading a folded newspaper. He'd been in this building for 18 months. He'd chosen it because the rent was manageable and the neighborhood needed a good mechanic. He'd told himself that every time the numbers got tight. Send the vehicle, he said, 8 a.m. tomorrow. He didn't sleep well that night. This wasn't unusual. He rarely slept well, and it had nothing to do with worrying about work or money, though both of those things were real concerns. It was more that the quiet of the apartment at night tended to expand into spaces he didn't always want it expanding into. His daughter Maya was 7. She slept in the room across the hall in a bed shaped like a cloud. Her selection, when he'd let her pick furniture at a second-hand store the previous spring. She had a nightlight that projected stars onto the ceiling, and sometimes Liam could see the faint glow of it under her door. And that was the thing that made the apartment feel like a home, instead of just a place he paid rent on. Maya's mother had left when Maya was 4. Not dramatically, not with a fight that explained everything cleanly. She had just gradually been there less and less, and then one day she wasn't there at all. Liam didn't talk about it much. Maya asked questions sometimes, and he answered them as honestly as he could without saying things that would hurt her, which was a tightrope he'd been walking for 3 years and didn't expect to stop walking anytime soon. He put Maya to bed at 8:30, read her 2 chapters of a book about a girl who trained horses, and stayed until she fell asleep, which took about 4 minutes. She dropped off fast. She always had. He used to worry about what she'd dream about. He'd eventually decided she was fine, and he was the one who needed watching. Back in the kitchen, he made himself a cup of coffee he didn't really need and sat at the table with his laptop. He pulled up everything he could find about the 2022 Meridian Executive. It was a high-end SUV, the kind of vehicle that was more rolling computer than automobile, loaded with interconnected electronic systems that communicated with each other constantly. He'd worked on a few of them at Hargrove. They were beautiful machines when they ran right, and a diagnostic nightmare when something in the electronic architecture went sideways, because the systems were layered in ways that made isolating a fault genuinely difficult if you didn't know where to look. He remembered something from his time at Hargrove, a manufacturer's technical service bulletin, a TSB in the industry, that had come through about 18 months after the 2021 models launched. It described a specific failure mode in the vehicle's auxiliary power distribution fuse block, a hairline defect in a particular fuse design that could cause intermittent voltage drops to multiple electronic systems simultaneously. The failure was progressive. It got worse over time, with factors like temperature cycling accelerating the deterioration. The fix was straightforward. Identify and replace the specific fuse, run a system verification cycle. The cost of the part? $14. Liam had flagged the bulletin to his service manager at Hargrove, a man named Derek Sousa, and suggested they cross-reference their customer database to identify any vehicles that might be affected. Sousa had nodded, thanked him, and done nothing. 2 weeks later, Liam had followed up. Sousa had told him the bulletin had been reviewed and deemed not applicable to their customer base. Liam had pushed back. He'd actually pulled VYNs and found 3 affected vehicles in their system. Sousa had told him to stay in his lane. A month after that, during a routine audit of service recommendations, Liam had found evidence that the service department was systematically recommending module replacements for vehicles that presented with symptoms consistent with the bulletin's described failure. The repairs ran between $8,000 and $15,000 per vehicle. The actual fix, if the bulletin applied, was $14 in parts and 40 minutes of labor. He'd brought this to Sousa's supervisor. He'd documented his findings, sent emails, requested a formal review. 6 weeks later, he'd been called into a meeting with HR and told his position was being eliminated in a departmental restructuring. He'd kept every email, every document, everything. He hadn't known what to do with them until now. The Meridian executive arrived at 7:50 in the morning, driven by a woman in a dark blazer who handed Liam a key fob, said, "Ms. Sterling will call at noon to check in," and left in an Uber that had been waiting at the curb. Liam walked around the vehicle before he touched anything. It was black, immaculate, the kind of clean that came from professional detailing rather than from someone who loved their car. The tires were perfect. The body panels showed no damage, no wear. It looked like it had come off the floor of a luxury auto show. He got in, put the key fob in proximity, and started it. The dashboard lit up like a warning board at an airport. Check engine, stability control system fault. Electronic power steering caution, reduced power mode active. He counted 8 separate warning indicators. The vehicle ran, but sluggishly. The restricted performance mode limited throttle response and felt like driving through resistance, like the vehicle was fighting itself. He plugged in his diagnostic scanner and let it read the system for a full 3 minutes before he even looked at the codes. He wanted the complete picture before he started forming opinions, because forming opinions too early was how technicians talked themselves into the wrong diagnosis. The codes came back. There were 11 of them, spread across 4 different control modules. On the surface, this looked like exactly what Hargrove had claimed, a widespread electronic failure requiring systematic module replacement. If you took the codes at face value, without looking beneath them, the $200,000 estimate started to make a kind of sense. Liam didn't take them at face value. He looked at the codes the way you looked at symptoms in a patient, not as the disease itself, but as clues pointing towards something else. And what these symptoms suggested, taken together, was not multiple simultaneous module failures. What they suggested was a single upstream failure that had cascaded through the system. The modules weren't broken. They were reporting correctly. They were reporting that they weren't receiving the power they needed to operate properly. He went to the fuse block. It was tucked under the dashboard on the passenger side, behind a panel that required a specific tool to remove, a detail that a quick repair wouldn't catch, and a detail that a dealership wanting to maximize billable hours might not advertise. Liam had the tool because he'd bought a full service set for the Meridian platform 8 months ago when he'd started seeing more of them come through independent shops. He pulled the panel, got his light, and started checking fuses. He found it in 11 minutes. Fuse number 23 in the auxiliary block. It looked fine visually. That was the insidious thing about the defect the TSB had described. The fuse didn't blow. It didn't turn the indicator color that meant failure. It developed a hairline fault in its internal conductor that caused intermittent resistance. Enough resistance to starve connected systems of consistent power, but not enough to trigger the fuse's own failure indicator. You had to test it under load. Liam tested it under load. The reading was wrong, not dramatically, not by a margin that screamed failure, but wrong by enough in a system this precise to cause exactly the cascade of errors the vehicle was showing. He sat back on his heels and looked at the fuse. $14. He replaced it with a spare he had in stock. He'd ordered a set of them months ago for reasons he could now articulate with uncomfortable clarity. He ran the system verification cycle, cleared the codes, started the vehicle. The dashboard was clean. Every warning gone. The engine ran smooth and quiet the way it was supposed to. He took it around the block, monitoring the scanner in real time. No faults, no hesitation. The performance restriction had lifted completely. He parked it back in the bay, sat in the driver's seat, and looked at the clean dashboard for a long moment. Then he pulled out his phone and called Sophia Sterling. She answered on the second ring. "Mr. Parker." "The vehicle's fixed," he said. A silence. Then, "Fixed how?" "A fuse," he said. "One fuse in the auxiliary power distribution block. $14 for the part. Call it an hour of labor, including diagnostic and verification." Another silence. This one was longer. "That's..." She stopped. Started again. "Hargrove told me each vehicle needed a full module replacement. They said the control systems were..." "The control systems are fine," Liam said. "They were responding correctly to an upstream power issue. Once the upstream issue was resolved, the modules went back to normal operation. The vehicle's been around the block twice. Scanner shows clean, no fault codes. You want me to document all of it? I can have a written report to you by end of day." He could hear her breathing on the other end of the line, processing, recalibrating. "I have 7 more vehicles," she said. "I know. If they all have the same problem..." "They probably do," he said. "The vehicles are the same year, same build configuration, same usage pattern. They spend a lot of time idling in city traffic, which is exactly the thermal cycling environment the defect accelerates in. If one of them developed the fault in that 10-day window, the others were probably already progressing toward it. How much for all 8? Parts and labor?" Liam thought for a second. "Call it $120 in parts. Labor, maybe 8 hours total. I'll give you a flat rate. Call it $1,000 for the whole job." $1,000, she said flatly, like she was making sure she'd heard correctly. "Versus 200,000, he said. "Yeah." She laughed. It was a short, sharp sound, not entirely amused. More like the laugh of someone who had almost made a very expensive mistake and could feel the near miss in their chest. "I'm going to send the other 7, she said, "and I'm going to want to talk to you, not just about the vehicles." "Sure," Liam said. "Send them whenever you want." He hung up and walked back into the bay, where Marcus was staring at the Meridian executive with the expression of someone who'd just seen something mildly unbelievable. "All of it was a fuse?" Marcus said. "All of it was a fuse." Marcus shook his head slowly. "Man." "Yeah," Liam said. He picked up his coffee from the workbench, saw it was cold by now. It was always cold by the time he got back to it, and took a sip anyway. "Go get the Meridian service manual. We're about to have 7 more of these coming in." "And Hargrove?" Marcus asked. He'd heard enough of the conversation to piece together the shape of what was happening. Liam set the coffee down. He looked at the clean, quiet SUV sitting in his bay, dashboard dark and silent and correct. "Hargrove," he said, "is going to be a whole separate conversation." The other 7 vehicles arrived over the next 2 days in staggered deliveries. 2 on Wednesday afternoon, 3 on Thursday morning, 2 more Thursday evening. Liam and Marcus worked through them systematically, and by Friday noon, all 8 were done. Every single one had the same fault. Fuse 23 in the auxiliary block. Every single one had the same solution. The total parts cost came to $112. While they worked, Liam pulled out a folder he'd kept in the bottom drawer of his desk since the day he was escorted out of Hargrove's building with a cardboard box and 2 weeks' severance. He hadn't looked at it often. There had been a period, maybe the first 6 months after he was fired, when he'd thought about what to do with it. An attorney, a regulatory complaint, a news tip. But he was dealing with a new baby and a partner who was already pulling away, and a mortgage on a house that suddenly felt like a trap, and the fight had seemed too big and the outcome too uncertain. He'd kept the folder, he'd filed it away. He'd told himself that someday, when the time was right, it would matter. He spread the documents out on his desk now and read through them carefully. There were 17 emails, correspondence between himself and Derek Souza, himself and Souza's supervisor, himself and the service department's compliance coordinator. There were 3 internal reports he'd drafted and submitted through official channels. There were copies of the TSB, time-stamped with his download date. There were printouts of the VIN cross-references he'd run, showing the affected vehicles in Hargrove's own system. And there was one email, dated 6 weeks before his termination, in which Sousa's supervisor wrote to the service director, copying the compliance coordinator, stating that the ongoing concern raised by technician Parker regarding TSB-2021-1194 had been reviewed, and that the potential revenue impact of proactive outreach to affected vehicle owners had been assessed and did not align with departmental performance targets. Potential revenue impact. Departmental performance targets. It was careful language, corporate language, designed to say a thing without saying it. But the meaning wasn't ambiguous. Alerting customers to a $14 fix would cost the service department significant revenue. So they hadn't done it. And when Liam had kept pushing, they'd removed him. He photographed every page with his phone, uploaded them to a secure cloud folder, and put the originals back in the envelope. Then he called Sophia Sterling. "I need to meet with you in person," he said. "Not about the vehicles. About something else. About why those vehicles were diagnosed the way they were." A pause. "When?" "Whenever you can." "Tomorrow morning," she said. "My office." Sophia Sterling's office was on the 31st floor of a glass building on Walker Drive, and Liam knew, in the elevator on the way up, that it was the kind of building he didn't normally have business in. He was wearing the cleanest clothes he owned, dark jeans, a button-front shirt, a jacket he'd bought 2 years ago for a custody mediation meeting and hadn't worn since. He'd gotten the grease out from under his fingernails the night before, which always took longer than it should. He was carrying a manila envelope and a laptop bag. The elevator opened into a reception area with a long desk, clean sightlines, and the kind of quiet that money buys. A woman at the desk looked up, said, "Mr. Parker?" like she'd been expecting him, which she had, and walked him through a corridor past a wall of framed photographs. Sophia at ribbon cuttings. Sophia with politicians and executives. Sophia accepting awards he didn't recognize. She was not what he'd expected from the phone. He'd built a picture in his head from her voice, precise, controlled, efficient, and he'd imagined someone older, more polished, someone who wore power like armor. The woman who stood up from behind a desk and extended her hand was 30 years old maybe, with dark hair and an expression that was sharp without being unkind. She looked like someone who paid attention, which Liam had learned was rarer than it sounded. "Mr. Parker," she said, "thank you for coming. Thank you for having me." They sat, her behind the desk, him across from it, and she folded her hands and looked at him with the directness of someone who didn't have time for warm-up. "You said this was about more than the vehicles." "It is." He set the manila envelope on her desk. "Before I open this, I want to explain who I am and how I know what I know. Because the evidence I'm about to show you, it's real, it's documented, but the context matters." She nodded once. "Go ahead." He told her about his 4 years at Hargrove. He told her about the TSB, the manufacturer's bulletin that described exactly the defect he'd found in her vehicles. He told her about flagging it to Sousa, about the pushback, about the VIN cross-reference, and the 3 affected vehicles in Hargrove's own system. He told her about the emails he'd sent, the reports he'd filed. He told her about the email from Sousa's supervisor, the one about revenue impact and departmental performance targets. And then he told her about getting fired. She listened through all of it without interrupting. Her expression didn't change much, but her eyes did. They got more focused as he talked, the way eyes do when someone is not just hearing but organizing, filing, connecting. When he finished, he opened the envelope and slid the documents across her desk. She looked through them one at a time. She took her time. She asked 2 questions. One about the TSB date relative to her vehicle's purchase date, one about the specific language in the supervisor's email. He answered both. Then she set the documents down, put her hands flat on the desk, and looked at him. "How many customers do you think were affected?" she asked. "I don't know the full scope," he said. "The VIN list I pulled was limited to their active service database at the time. If the practice continued after I left, and based on what they quoted you, I think it did, the number could be significant." "Significant," she said, like the word was insufficient for what she was thinking. I have no way of knowing the dollar figure without access to their service records, he said. But the modules they recommended for your vehicles run between 8 and 15,000 each. If they've been doing this for 2 years across a volume dealership, yeah, significant. Sophia was quiet for a moment. She looked out the window at the city spread below them. Lake Michigan flat and gray on the horizon. The grid of the city ordered and indifferent. I want to arrange a meeting, she said. Formal, both sides, full documentation, on the record. She looked back at him. Would you be willing to come? He thought about it. He thought about the folder he'd kept for 2 years, about the morning he'd cleaned out his desk, about the drive home with the cardboard box in the back seat and Maya asleep in her car seat, and the particular flavor of that kind of defeat. Yeah, he said. I'll come. Hargrove Automotive Group responded to Sophia's meeting request within 4 hours. The response was not warm. It came through their legal department, a formal letter stating that Ms. Sterling's vehicles had been properly assessed by ASE certified technicians, that the recommended repairs were consistent with manufacturer specifications for the documented fault codes, and that any suggestion of improper diagnosis would be vigorously defended. There was a second paragraph that addressed Liam by name. It stated that Hargrove was aware that Ms. Sterling had employed a former technician whose employment had been terminated for performance-related issues, that this individual had a documented history of making unfounded claims against the company, and that his diagnosis of the subject vehicles was likely to have voided any remaining manufacturer warranty coverage. Sophia forwarded it to Liam with a single line. Does this change anything for you? He read it twice. Then he typed back, No. When do you want to do this? She set the meeting for the following Friday. In the days between, Liam drove the first repaired Meridian every evening after closing the shop. Not because he doubted the repair. He didn't. But because the documentation needed to be bulletproof. He kept a log, date, mileage, system status, scanner readings. Every evening, the vehicle reported clean. By the time Friday arrived, he had 9 days of post-repair performance data showing 0 fault recurrence across 212 miles of urban driving. He also went home to his apartment, sat at the kitchen table after Maya was in bed, and put together a presentation in PowerPoint. He'd never been good at PowerPoint. He was a technician, not a communicator, or that was what he told himself. But he worked at it, and what came out was clean and factual. The TSB, the fuse, the diagnostic methodology, the scanner data, the before and after, the post-repair log. He added one more section at the end. He titled it Prior Documentation and put the emails in it in chronological order, with the supervisor's email about revenue impact highlighted. Maya wandered out of her room at 10 o'clock on Wednesday night and found him at the table, squinting at the laptop. Daddy, why aren't you sleeping? I'm working, Bug, he said. Go back to bed. She climbed into the chair next to him instead, which was what she always did when he told her to go back to bed. She looked at the screen. Is that a car? It's a really fancy car. Is it broken? It was. I fixed it. She considered this. With what? A tiny little piece, he said. About this big. He held up his thumb and forefinger an inch apart. She looked at him with the expression she sometimes had, the one that seemed older than 7 and made him simultaneously proud and sad in a way he couldn't explain. And people said it couldn't be fixed. Something like that. She nodded slowly, like this confirmed something she'd already suspected about the world. Then she went back to bed, and Liam turned back to his laptop, and the apartment was quiet again, and he kept working. Friday morning came cold and overcast, the kind of Chicago November morning that felt like the city was announcing something. Liam arrived at the Hargrove corporate offices, a different building from the dealership, glass and steel on the north side, at 9:45 for a 10 o'clock meeting. He was wearing the same jacket from the week before. He had his laptop bag and his manila envelope and a flash drive with the presentation and all supporting documents. He signed in at the front desk. A receptionist told him the conference room was on the 4th floor. He took the stairs. The conference room was large, long table, leather chairs, a wall of windows overlooking a parking structure. When Liam entered, there were already 7 people seated on one side of the table. He recognized 2 of them from his time at the dealership, a man named Patterson, who ran the corporate service operations, and a woman named Krebs from the legal department. There were 5 other people he didn't recognize, including 2 who were clearly attorneys based on the way they held their pens. Sophia was already there, sitting on the other side of the table with 2 people from her company, a woman who turned out to be her general counsel and a younger man who appeared to be taking detailed notes on everything. There was 1 empty seat on Sophia's side. Liam sat in it. Patterson spoke first, in the voice of a man who had decided before arriving that the conversation was already over. He went through a prepared summary of Hargrove's diagnostic process, cited the fault codes, cited the module replacement recommendation, cited the technician's certifications. He used the phrase industry standard protocol 4 times in 8 minutes. He never looked at Liam directly. Liam let him finish. Then Sophia said simply, "Mr. Parker?" He opened his laptop. He connected it to the room's display system. It took a minute, required a dongle he'd had the foresight to bring, and put his presentation on the screen. He walked through it without rushing. The TSB. The specific failure mode it described, the diagnostic process he'd used on the first vehicle, the fuse, the verification cycle, the clean scanner readings post-repair. He showed the 9-day performance log. He showed photographs of the fuse test results before and after. He showed the scanner data from all 8 vehicles, confirming the same root cause in each. He spoke quietly. He didn't editorialize. He just showed what he'd found and how he'd found it, and let the data be the argument. The attorneys on Hargrove's side were writing steadily. Patterson's expression had shifted from dismissive to something more guarded. Then Liam advanced to the final section of his presentation. Prior documentation. He let the emails load on the screen one at a time. His initial flag to Sousa, the follow-up, the VIN cross-reference, the formal compliance report, and then the supervisor's email. Revenue impact, departmental performance targets. The room went very quiet. One of Hargrove's attorneys set down his pen. Patterson's jaw had tightened. He was looking at the screen with the expression of a man who had just realized that what he'd thought was a contained problem was actually something much larger and older. Krebs from legal spoke for the first time. Her voice was carefully controlled. "Where did you obtain those internal documents?" "I wrote them," Liam said, "and I received them. They were sent to me directly. I kept copies." "The email from Mr.—" She stopped herself. "The email from the supervisor was sent to a distribution list," Liam said. "I was on that list at the time. I received it. I kept it." Another silence. Sophia Sterling, who had not said a word during the entire presentation, picked up a pen and wrote something on the notepad in front of her. She set the pen down. She looked across the table at Patterson with an expression that was not angry. It was something more deliberate than anger. "I'd like to understand," she said, "how many other customers your service department has given this same recommendation to, for this same fault, on vehicles where the actual repair was a $14 fuse." Patterson opened his mouth. Sophia continued before he could speak. "I'd also like to understand why a technician who identified this problem and flagged it through appropriate channels was terminated 6 weeks later. The termination was unrelated." "I'd like to understand that too," she said. "And I suspect regulators will want to understand it as well." The word regulators landed in the room like something dropped from a height. One of Hargrove's attorneys leaned over and said something quietly to Patterson. Patterson listened. His expression changed again, something draining out of it, some certainty that had been there when he walked in. Liam closed his laptop. His hands were steady. He hadn't expected to feel this way. He'd prepared for a fight, for pushback, for the particular aggression of people who had power and were afraid of losing it. What he felt instead was something quieter and harder to name. Like watching a thing that had been wrong for a long time slowly, finally, begin to tip. He picked up his coffee cup. He'd brought it from a place down the block, paper cup, had already gone cold, and took a sip. The meeting lasted another 2 hours. He let Sophia and her counsel do most of the talking from that point. That was fine. He'd said what he'd come to say. On the way down the stairs afterward, Sophia fell into step beside him. She was half a head shorter than him, and she moved with the efficiency of someone who was always headed somewhere. "You weren't nervous," she said. "It wasn't a question exactly." "I was nervous," he said. "You didn't look it." "I had good material," he said. "It's easier to be calm when you know you're right." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "What happens now, from your end?"
From my end, he pushed open the lobby door, and the November air hit them both. I go back to the shop. I have Gerald's pickup to finish. I still haven't nailed down that misfire. And I've got a Civic with a transmission leak that I told someone would be done by Monday.
Sophia looked at him. Something in her expression shifted, a slight drop of the control she'd maintained all morning. You fixed an $8 million problem with a $14 fuse, she said, and now you're going back to work on a Civic. The Civic owner needs her car, he said. She works nights. A beat passed between them on the sidewalk, cold air moving around them, the city indifferent and constant. Then Sophia Sterling nodded once, like she was filing something away.
I'll be in touch, she said. She turned and walked back toward the building's entrance, and Liam Parker walked toward the parking garage where he'd left his 10-year-old truck. And the morning went on the way mornings do, without ceremony, without resolution, without any indication of what came next. He had work to do. He went and did it.
Gerald's pickup still didn't make sense. That was the first thing Liam dealt with when he got back to the shop Friday afternoon. Not the meeting, not the attorneys, not the look on Patterson's face when the supervisor's email appeared on the conference room screen. Gerald's truck. The misfire that happened every 45 minutes like a metronome. He'd been so absorbed in the Meridian situation that he'd let it sit longer than he should have, and Gerald had called twice, politely, but with the particular edge of a man whose patience was running thin. Liam got under the hood at 2 in the afternoon and stayed there until almost 6. Marcus had gone home at 5, which left the shop quiet except for the heater clicking and the sound of traffic on the street outside. The late afternoon light came through the front windows at a low angle and lit up the dust particles floating in the air of the bay. And Liam worked through the problem methodically, the way he always did when the obvious answer kept being wrong. Eliminate, isolate, test, eliminate again. He found it at 5:47, a crankshaft position sensor that was technically within spec. It would pass a static test. It would read fine on the scanner. But under thermal load, after the engine had been running for a sustained period, developed a microsecond lag in its signal that was just enough to throw the ignition timing off on one cylinder. It happened every 45 minutes because that was approximately how long it took the sensor to reach the temperature threshold where the lag appeared. Below that threshold, perfect. Above it, misfire. It was the kind of fault that made experienced technicians feel briefly like they were losing their minds, and then feel briefly brilliant when they found it. He sat on the shop floor for a moment with his back against the truck's front tire and looked at the ceiling and thought about the day he'd had. The conference room. Patterson's jaw tightening. The silence after the supervisor's email went up on the screen. Sophia's voice saying the word regulators like she was placing a chess piece. He thought about all of that, and then he got up and ordered the crankshaft position sensor online for next day delivery. And he texted Gerald that the part was coming in and the truck would be ready Monday, no later. Gerald texted back, "Thank you, man, I was starting to get worried." Liam typed, "Sorry for the wait, it was a tricky one." He thought for a second and added, "But I got it." He locked the shop at 6:15 and drove home in the dark. Maya was at the kitchen table doing homework when he came in, her backpack unzipped and leaking papers onto the floor beside her chair, a half-eaten apple on the table next to her math worksheet. She looked up when he came through the door, assessed him in the quick, total way that children assess the emotional state of the adults they depend on, and apparently decided he was okay. "Mrs. Fontaine gave us 20 fractions," she said, by way of greeting. "20's a lot." "It's too many." He hung his jacket, washed his hands at the kitchen sink. The grease always took a while, and sat down across from her. She had her tongue between her teeth the way she did when she was concentrating. He watched her work through a problem, her pencil moving in small, deliberate strokes. "How was your day?" she asked, without looking up. "Long," he said. "Good, maybe. I'm not totally sure yet." She looked up at that. "How come you don't know if it was good? Sometimes things happen and you can't tell right away if they're going to turn out okay," he said. "You find out later." She considered this seriously. "Like when I tried to make pancakes and they turned out really flat, but they still tasted okay?" "Exactly like that," he said. She went back to her fractions. He made dinner, pasta, because it was fast and she ate it without argument. And they ate together at the table. Maya telling him about a disagreement she'd had with her friend Destiny over the rules of a game nobody seemed to fully understand, and Liam listening and asking questions. And for that hour, the conference room in Patterson and the documents in the manila envelope felt very far away. After Maya was in bed, he sat in the kitchen with a beer he barely touched and his phone face up on the table. He was waiting, without entirely admitting to himself that he was waiting, for some kind of communication from Sophia, something that indicated what happened next. He didn't know what the next step was. He'd shown her the evidence. He'd shown the room. He didn't have a plan beyond that, and the absence of a plan bothered him in a quiet, persistent way. His phone buzzed at 9:51. It was not Sophia. It was a number he didn't recognize, with a 312 area code, Chicago proper. He answered it. "Mr. Parker." The voice was male, older, businesslike. "My name is Robert Fenn. I'm an attorney. I've been retained by Hargrove Automotive Group." Liam set down the beer bottle. "Okay, I want to be direct with you," Fenn said. "My client is concerned about the materials you presented today, specifically about the internal correspondence you shared. There are questions about how that correspondence was obtained and whether its use constitutes a breach of your separation agreement." "I was on the distribution list for those emails," Liam said. "I received them during my employment. I didn't take anything that wasn't sent to me." "The separation agreement you signed includes a confidentiality provision, which I had an attorney review before I signed it," Liam said. "He told me the provision covers trade secrets and proprietary business information. It doesn't cover evidence of illegal conduct." A pause. Fenn hadn't expected that answer, or at least hadn't expected it to come that fast. "I'm not sure the characterization of illegal—" "Mr. Fenn," Liam said, and his voice was quiet and even. "I've had 2 years to think about what's in that folder and whether I had the right to use it. I had it reviewed. I know where I stand." He paused. "Is there something else you wanted to say, or was this it?" Another pause, longer this time. "My client would like to explore an informal resolution before this goes further," Fenn said. "What does that mean?" "It means there may be interest in discussing a settlement, something that addresses your concerns without the need for regulatory involvement or litigation." Liam looked at the kitchen wall. There was a drawing Maya had made the previous month taped above the light switch. A picture of a dog they didn't own but she wanted, drawn in orange crayon with a disproportionately large head and a tail that curved up like a question mark. He looked at it for a moment. "I'm not going to accept a settlement that requires me to stay quiet," he said. "If that's what you're talking about, then this conversation is over." "Mr. Parker, I'm not trying to make money off this," he said. "I fixed 8 cars. I got paid for fixing them. What happens with the rest of it isn't about me anymore." A very long pause. "I'll relay that to my client," Fenn said. His voice had changed. The businesslike precision was still there, but something had shifted beneath it. Something that might have been, if Liam was reading it right, a faint, reluctant respect. "Have a good evening." The line went dead. Liam set his phone down and looked at it for a moment. Then he picked up the beer bottle and finished what was left in it, even though it had gone warm. He thought, "They called me the same day, same evening. That told him something. That told him they were afraid. And that afraid people moved fast, and that moving fast sometimes made you sloppy." He went to bed at 11. He didn't sleep great. He hadn't expected to. The weekend passed in the way weekends passed when Liam had a lot on his mind and was trying not to show it. Saturday, he took Maya to her soccer practice. She played in a rec league with enthusiasm that wildly exceeded her coordination, which he found completely lovable, and sat in a folding chair on the sideline in the cold with the other parents, a thermos of coffee in his hands, watching her chase the ball across the field with the specific focus of a kid who wanted to be good at something and hadn't fully figured out yet that wanting it wasn't enough. He didn't tell her that. She'd figure it out herself, and when she did, he'd help her work through it. After practice, they went to a diner she liked, the kind with laminated menus and booths, with red vinyl seats that had been repaired with electrical tape. Maya got a grilled cheese and a chocolate milk, and ate with the focused dedication of someone who had just exercised. And Liam had black coffee and the thing on the menu the waitress described as a hearty scramble that turned out to be eggs and peppers, and something that might have been chorizo, and it was pretty good. "Daddy," Maya said, around her third bite of grilled cheese, "are we going to be okay?" He looked up. "What do you mean?" She shrugged, looking at her plate. "I heard you on the phone last night. You sounded serious." He'd thought she was asleep. He should have known better. Maya slept light, always had,
woke at the slightest sound from the hall. "Yeah," he said, "we're going to be okay." "How do you know?" "Because I did the right thing," he said, "and I've got documents."
She looked at him. That's not really an answer. "I know," he said, "but it's the one I've got right now." She seemed to accept this in the way she accepted most things from him, not entirely satisfied, but trusting the process. She picked up her chocolate milk and took a long drink through the straw. "If things get bad," she said carefully, "can I still stay at Destiny's on Fridays?" "The sleepover situation is locked in," he said. "That's not negotiable." She nodded, visibly relieved by this, and went back to her sandwich. Liam looked at her over his coffee cup and felt the particular complicated thing he always felt, the weight of being her only steady thing, and the stubbornness that came from that weight. And somewhere underneath both of those, the thing that didn't have a clean name, the thing that had made him keep that folder for 2 years when the easier choice would have been to throw it away. Monday arrived, the crankshaft sensor came in by 10, and Gerald had his truck back by 2 in the afternoon. He shook Liam's hand at the counter with the genuine, unguarded gratitude of someone whose daily life had been disrupted and was now restored. "I took it to 2 other places," Gerald admitted, counting out cash. "Nobody could figure it out." "It was hiding," Liam said. "Well, you got it." Gerald pocketed his receipt. "My buddy needs his brakes done. I'm sending him here." "Tell him to call ahead," Liam said. The day was otherwise routine. A tire rotation, an oil change, a woman who'd hit something in a parking garage and needed a front bumper assessed, and Liam worked through all of it. And Marcus played music from a Bluetooth speaker that was bolted to the wall of the bay, and the heater clicked on and off, and the afternoon went by. At 4:15, his phone rang. Sophia Sterling. "I heard from my attorneys," she said. "Hargrove reached out this morning. They want to negotiate." "They called me Friday night," he said. "An attorney named Fenn. He called me too." A pause. "What did you tell him?" "That I won't accept a settlement that requires silence." "That's what I told them as well." He could hear something in her voice. Not surprise exactly, more like confirmation, like she'd expected him to say that but had needed to hear it anyway. "Liam, I want to be honest with you about where this is going because I think you should know the full picture." He walked from the bay into the office, closed the door behind him. Marcus kept working. The music didn't stop. "Go ahead." "I've had my legal team reviewing Hargrove's service records, the ones that are accessible through warranty claims and insurance filings. It's not the full picture, but it's enough to see a shape." She paused, and when she continued, her voice was measured, like she was reading from something. "Over the past 26 months, Hargrove's service department has billed out 31 module replacement jobs on 2021 and 2022 Meridian executive vehicles. Average repair cost, $11,000 per vehicle. Total revenue from those repairs, approximately $340,000. Liam sat down in the desk chair. It rolled left. He put his foot out. "If those vehicles had the same fault yours did," Sophia continued, "the actual repair cost would have been $14 in parts per vehicle." He did the math without meaning to. 31 vehicles, $11,000 each, against $14 each. That's... He stopped. "A lot of people who paid for something they didn't need," she said. "And that's only what we can see from outside their records. The full internal picture could be worse." He sat with that for a moment. 31 people. 31 families, maybe, or businesses, people who'd trusted a dealership with a good address and nice chairs in the waiting room and paid thousands of dollars because they had no reason to believe the diagnosis was wrong. He thought about himself 2 years ago, sitting in a termination meeting and being told his position was being eliminated due to restructuring, and how the word restructuring had sat in his chest like a stone for weeks afterward because it was designed to sound like nothing had happened. "What happens to those people?" he asked. "The 31. "That's the question I'm working on," Sophia said. "I've had a conversation with an attorney who handles consumer protection cases. If we bring this to the Illinois Attorney General's office, they have the authority to compel Hargrove's full service records. If the pattern holds, there may be grounds for a class action on behalf of affected customers. There may also be regulatory action against the dealership's service license. And the manufacturer? The manufacturer is a separate problem," she said, with a flatness that suggested she'd already started working on it. "They issued the TSB. If they were aware that their authorized dealers weren't implementing the fix and were instead profiting from the defect, they have exposure too. My attorneys are looking at what that looks like. Liam rubbed the back of his neck. The desk lamp in the office hummed slightly, had always hummed slightly, was the kind of thing you stopped hearing after a while and only noticed when you were sitting very still. "Why are you telling me all this?" he asked. "I mean, what do you need from me for it? Honestly?" She sounded like she was choosing words carefully. "Your testimony. If this goes to a regulatory proceeding or litigation, you're the person who identified the fault, who has the prior documentation, who can explain what the correct diagnosis is and what the correct repair costs. You're the center of the technical evidence." A pause. "I'm not going to pretend that's nothing. It'll take time, and it could get uncomfortable. Hargrove's attorneys will try to make you look unreliable. They already used the termination against you once. They'll try again," he said. "Yes." He looked at the wall of the office, the 3-year-old calendar, the coffee maker that was down to a quarter of a pot and had been for the last hour, a sticky note on the edge of the monitor that said "Call parts supplier, Thursday," in his own handwriting from a Thursday 3 weeks ago. "I still have the original folder," he said. "Everything's documented, and I kept the scanner data from all 8 of your vehicles, before and after, post-repair logs, everything." "I know," she said. "That's why I'm calling you." He heard underneath the efficiency something that might have been gratitude. She wasn't the kind of person who said thank you easily. He'd figured that out. The gratitude came out sideways, embedded in the directness. "Okay," he said. "I'm in." The following 2 weeks were not cinematic. Nobody arrived with cameras or a cheering crowd. What arrived instead was paperwork and a parade of phone calls from attorneys he'd never met, and 2 in-person meetings at a law office on LaSalle Street where he sat across from a consumer protection attorney named Andrea Voss, who asked him the same questions in slightly different orders to see if his answers changed. They didn't change because they were the truth, and the truth doesn't have variance. Voss was small, precise, and had the disconcerting habit of writing things down immediately after he said them, as if she was worried the words would disappear. She asked him about his diagnostic methodology, about the TSB, about his employment history at Hargrove, about every email in the folder. She asked him, twice, whether he had any financial interest in the outcome. He told her he'd been paid a flat rate for the repair work, and that was the end of his financial involvement. "No expectation of additional compensation?" she pressed. "No," he said. She looked at him over her notepad. She had a look that was used to people lying to her, and you could see it recalibrating when the lies didn't come. "Most people in your position would be looking for something from this." "I had a folder full of documents for 2 years," he said. "I wasn't looking for anything from it. I just couldn't throw it away." She wrote that down too. On a Wednesday evening in the 3rd week, Marcus knocked on the office door while Liam was closing out the day's invoices. "Got a second?" Marcus came in and leaned against the doorframe with his arms crossed. He was 26 and wore his feelings plainly, which Liam appreciated even when it was inconvenient. Right now his face said he'd been thinking about something for a while. "You know I've been with you since you opened this place," Marcus said. "I know. Things have been tighter than tight sometimes." "I know that too. So I need to ask." Marcus shifted his weight. "All this stuff with Hargrove, is it going to blow back on the shop? Because you've got me working here, and I've got rent, and I'm not saying you did anything wrong, I'm just asking what we're looking at." Liam set down his pen. He'd asked himself the same question 100 times in the last 3 weeks, and hadn't had a clean answer. He decided to give Marcus the honest version, rather than the reassuring one. "I don't know exactly," he said. "Hargrove might try to make noise about the repairs, claim there's some liability. Their lawyer already floated the warranty angle, but the manufacturer confirmed the repair methodology is consistent with the TSB, and I've got 9 days of post-repair performance data on all 8 vehicles showing no fault recurrence. Legally, I'm on solid ground." He paused. "Financially, if there's any legal action, it'll cost money I don't have to defend." That's the honest answer. Marcus was quiet for a moment. "What about Sophia Sterling? She's involved in all of this." "She's driving it mostly. Her attorneys are doing the heavy lifting." "You think she's got your back?" Liam considered this. He thought about the way she'd said, "I'll be in touch" on the sidewalk outside the Hargrove building.
The way she'd called him to lay out the full picture before asking anything from him. The fact that she'd forwarded Hargrove's legal letter to him within an hour of receiving it. "I think she's not a person who forgets what someone did for her," he said. "Whether that means she's got my back, I don't know. I didn't do this for her." Marcus nodded slowly. "All right." He uncrossed his arms. "For what it's worth, I think you did the right thing, both the repair and the other stuff." "The folder?" "Yeah." Marcus pushed off the doorframe. "We gonna be okay?" "I genuinely don't know," Liam said, "but probably." Marcus gave him the look of a young man filing probably under close enough and went back to closing up the bay. The morning everything shifted was a Thursday, 17 days after the conference room meeting. Liam had just finished an oil change and was writing up the service ticket when Andrea Voss called. "We filed the complaint with the Attorney General's office this morning," she said without preamble. "Consumer fraud, deceptive trade practices, systematic misrepresentation of necessary repairs. We submitted your documentation as the foundational technical evidence. The TSB, the diagnostic records, the pre- and post-repair scanner data, and the internal emails." Liam set down the service ticket. "How did they respond?" "They haven't yet. It was filed this morning. What I can tell you is that the complaint is substantive and well documented, and the AG's office takes this category of complaint seriously. We should expect them to open a formal inquiry, and if they do, they'll compel Hargrove's full service records. And then the 31 cases become visible. If the pattern holds, yes. And we have reason to believe it will hold." A pause. "There's something else. The manufacturer's regional compliance officer reached out to Ms. Sterling's attorney yesterday. They're concerned, their word, about the TSB non-implementation. They've initiated an internal audit of Hargrove service records going back 30 months. The manufacturer is investigating their own dealer. Authorized dealers are required to implement TSBs under their franchise agreements," Voss said. "If Hargrove systematically failed to implement TSB 202119194, they may have violated the franchise terms. The manufacturer has independent grounds to act." Liam walked slowly to the doorway between the office and the bay. Marcus was across the shop, running water at the utility sink, back turned. The mid-morning light came through the big front windows and lay flat across the concrete floor. "What does this mean for the people who overpaid?" Liam asked. "It depends on how the investigation unfolds," Voss said. "Best case, the manufacturer agrees to participate in a restitution program for affected customers. Hargrove's liability coverage kicks in. People get refunds. It takes time, probably a year, maybe more. But it happens." A pause. "Worst case, Hargrove fights everything. The litigation drags, people get pennies on the dollar, and the principals avoid real accountability. What's the realistic case?" "Realistic case is somewhere between those two," she said. "The documentation you've provided is unusually strong. That helps. The manufacturer's involvement helps. The AG's office having jurisdiction helps." She paused. "You did good work, Mr. Parker. Whatever happens next, the foundation is solid." After he hung up, he stood in the doorway for a moment. The heater clicked on. Somewhere outside, a truck downshifted on the street with that particular gear-grinding sound that made him wince on reflex. He thought about a woman who'd driven a Meridian executive to a dealership on Michigan Avenue, shown them the warning lights on her dashboard, and been handed an estimate for $11,000. He thought about her signing that estimate, maybe asking if it was really necessary, being told, "Yes, it really is. These systems are complex. Trust us." He thought about her going home and figuring out how to afford it. Credit card, maybe? Payment plan. Money she didn't have that she paid anyway, because you trust the people with the expertise and the fancy waiting room and the certified technicians. $14. He went back to work. That evening, Sophia called him directly. Not through attorneys, not through her staff. His personal number, the one she'd had since the first call. "The AG's office called my attorney back within 6 hours of the filing," she said. "That's fast. It means they're treating it seriously." Voss told me. "She also told me you asked about the affected customers. The 31. He hadn't known Voss would relay that. "Yeah. I want you to know I'm thinking about the same thing," Sophia said. "I have resources my attorneys don't. I've already reached out to a firm that specializes in locating affected parties in consumer fraud cases. If we can identify the 31, get names, contact information, and reach them before Hargrove's attorneys do. We can make sure they understand their options before someone tries to talk them out of asserting them. You're going to find the people they overcharged.
I'm going to try, she said. Some of them may not know they were overcharged. That's the hard part about this kind of fraud. It only works because the customers don't have the technical knowledge to question the diagnosis. That's what makes it predatory. Liam sat in his truck in the parking spot behind the shop. He'd meant to drive home 20 minutes ago. The engine was running, heat blowing, the street outside orange under the sodium lights. "What made you stop?" he asked. "Before you called me. You were about to sign the paperwork. What made you stop?" A pause. He'd wondered this since the beginning and hadn't had a reason to ask. "Honestly," she said, the service advisor's face when he handed me the estimate. He didn't look like someone explaining a complicated situation. He looked like someone waiting to see if I'd flinch. She was quiet for a moment. "I've been in enough rooms where people are testing whether you'll push back to recognize the expression. So I pushed back." "And you called a mechanic with a bad reputation." "I called a mechanic with a good reputation that someone tried very hard to damage," she said. There was something dry in her voice and something else underneath it. "There's a difference." He didn't answer right away. Outside the truck, a cat crossed the parking lot in no particular hurry, ignored him completely, disappeared under a dumpster. "I appreciate that," he said. "I know," she said. "Get some sleep, Parker. There's more to come." She hung up, and he sat for another minute in the running truck, and then he drove home. Maya had left the kitchen light on for him, the way she'd started doing the last few weeks. He hadn't asked her to. She'd just started doing it. He didn't know when she decided that was her job, but he let it be her job, because some things you just accept. He made himself a sandwich he didn't particularly want, ate it standing over the sink, and went to bed. He thought before he fell asleep about Patterson's face in the conference room. That specific draining expression. The one that looked like a man watching a story he'd told himself for years develop a crack. And Liam thought about how long that crack had been there, invisible to everyone except the one person they'd been confident enough to fire. He'd kept the folder. He'd always kept the folder. And now the crack was going to become something you couldn't paper over. The Attorney General's office opened a formal inquiry into Hargrove Automotive Group on a Monday morning, 22 days after Liam had sat in that conference room and watched Patterson's certainty drain out of his face. Liam found out from Andrea Voss at 7:48 a.m. before he'd finished his first cup of coffee. He was still in the apartment, still in yesterday's thermal shirt. Maya already gone to school. The neighbor 2 floors down, a retired woman named Mrs. Okafor, who had appointed herself an unofficial grandmother to Maya, walked her to the bus stop every weekday morning in exchange for nothing except the occasional plate of whatever Liam cooked on Sundays, which was an arrangement that worked for everyone. "The inquiry triggers mandatory document preservation," Voss told him. "Hargrove can't destroy or alter records from this point forward without criminal exposure. That matters, because it means whatever's in those service records is frozen." "Can they still operate?" Liam asked. "Yes. An inquiry isn't a shutdown, but the AG's office will request their full service database within 30 days, and their attorneys will know that stonewalling is a losing strategy. At this point, the smart play for Hargrove would be to cooperate and try to shape the narrative. Whether they're smart enough to do that is another question." "Patterson wasn't giving me a smart play vibe," Liam said. "No," Voss said dryly. "He wasn't giving me one either, from what Ms. Sterling's counsel described." A pause. "There's one more thing. The manufacturer's audit team has been on site at Hargrove since last Thursday. They've been pulling service records against their warranty claim system. I don't have access to what they're finding, but the fact that they're still there, 4 business days in, suggests the scope is significant." After he hung up, Liam stood in the kitchen for a minute, coffee cooling in his hand, looking out the window at the alley below, where somebody had left a bicycle chained to a fire escape with the front wheel missing. He'd looked at that bicycle every morning for 4 months. He'd always meant to mention it to someone and never had. He drove to the shop, opened at 7, and went to work. This was the thing that the situation kept bumping up against. The shop didn't pause for any of it. Customers still came. Engines still failed in the particular ways engines failed in November, When temperature drops stressed seals and belts and battery terminals and sent people to mechanics with the specific urgency of a car that won't start in the cold. Liam and Marcus worked through the day's appointments, and the space heater clicked, and the fluorescent still flickered. He'd ordered the bulb twice, and it kept getting back-ordered. And the world outside the shop window went on being ordinary. What was not ordinary was the phone call he got at 2:15 from a number he didn't recognize. He almost didn't answer it. He was under a Subaru with a bad rear differential, and his phone was on the workbench, and Marcus was closer but was facing the other direction. He answered it on the fourth ring, still wiping his hands. "Mr. Parker." A woman's voice. Not young, not old. Careful. "My name is Helen Marsh. I was given your number by a woman named Sophia Sterling's office. I hope that's all right." "It's all right," Liam said slowly. "What can I do for you?"
"I'm not sure exactly." The careful quality in her voice was uncertainty, he realized. She was choosing words the way you choose them when you're not sure how you'll be received. "I own a 2022 Meridian Executive. I had it serviced at Hargrove Automotive about 8 months ago. They told me the electronic modules had failed and I needed a full replacement. I paid $12,400. Liam closed his eyes briefly. He opened them. "Miss Marsh," he said. "Helen, please." "Helen, was the vehicle repaired to your satisfaction after the work was done?" "It ran fine afterward," she said. "But Ms. Sterling's office contacted me last week and explained, or tried to explain, it's complicated, that there may have been a simpler problem that caused the warning lights. A fuse, they said, and that the correct repair should have cost much less." A pause. "I've been trying to understand what happened. I paid what I was told I needed to pay. I trusted them. I've used Hargrove for 6 years." The way she said 6 years, the particular flatness of it, told Liam everything about what she was actually saying. It wasn't about the $12,000, though that was real money, real hardship for most people. It was about 6 years of trust that had just been reappraised. "I can't tell you definitively what was wrong with your specific vehicle without examining it," he said. "I don't want to make a promise I can't keep. What I can tell you is that the fault these vehicles developed, the one with the fuse, is consistent with the symptoms you're describing. And 8 separate vehicles I examined all had it, and none of them needed module replacements. So they charged me $12,000 for something that cost $14 to fix." He didn't answer immediately. He could feel Marcus across the shop, not looking at him, but listening. "That appears to be possible," he said, "which is why there's a formal investigation now. You should have a conversation with Andrea Voss. She's the attorney handling the consumer side of this. She can explain your options better than I can." "I already have an appointment with her Thursday," Helen said. I wanted to talk to the mechanic, the one who found it." A pause, longer this time. "I wanted to know if you thought if it was obvious, that something was wrong." "No," he said. "It wasn't obvious. That's what made it work. The fault looks complex when you first see the scanner output. It looks like multiple systems failing simultaneously. Most technicians would have accepted that diagnosis. The deception wasn't clumsy. It was built on something real, a real symptom that had a cheap explanation they didn't want you to find." A long silence. "Thank you," she said. Her voice had gone slightly rough. Thank you." After he hung up, Marcus was quiet for about 30 seconds. "That was one of the people?" he said. "Yeah." Marcus turned back to what he was doing. After a moment he said, without looking up, "How many more?" 30, at least," Liam said. "Maybe more once they get into the full records." Marcus shook his head slowly. He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. The call from Helen Marsh was the first. Over the next 10 days, Sophia's team contacted and located 23 of the 31 flagged customers. Of those 23, 19 agreed to be represented in the consumer complaint. 4 declined. For a range of reasons, Voss explained, including 2 who had corporate fleet accounts, and whose companies had already written off the expense, one who simply didn't want involvement in anything legal under any circumstances, and one elderly man who told Sophia's investigator that he didn't trust the process and had lived long enough to know that the little guy usually lost regardless. Voss said that last one stung a little. Liam thought about it for a while after she told him. He understood the old man's position. He'd been in similar territory himself, 2 years ago. The territory where you have evidence, and you have righteous anger, and you have absolutely no certainty that any of it will matter.
The territory where you make a cost-benefit calculation about your own sanity and decide the math doesn't work. He'd made that calculation too. He just landed differently.
3 weeks after the inquiry opened, Liam got a call from Sophia on a Wednesday evening. She sounded different from usual, still controlled, but with something close to the surface that he hadn't heard before. Not alarm, more like the feeling of watching something large begin to move that you'd set in motion, but couldn't fully control. "The manufacturer's audit is done," she said. "Their compliance team sent a summary to my attorneys this afternoon." "How bad?" 38 vehicles, she said. Not 31, 38 over 31 months. And it's not only the Meridian Executive. There are 4 other models in the audit. Same fuse block design, same failure pattern, same TSB. Different TSB numbers, but structurally identical situations. Liam sat down on the workbench stool in the shop. He'd stayed late. Marcus was gone. The bay was dim except for the work light over the bench. They were running the same play on other models. "The service director appears to have developed a systematic approach," she said. "The audit team found an internal training document, not an official one, an internal one for the service advisors, that described how to present electronic fault codes to customers in a way that maximized perceived complexity." "A script," Liam said, essentially. How to talk about the codes, which words to use, how to explain why it was serious, how to present the estimate. She paused. "It's thorough, Liam, and it's damning. It means this wasn't opportunistic. It was deliberate and systematic." He turned that over in his head. He'd assumed negligence initially, doctors who didn't bother to look for the simple answer because the complicated one was more profitable. But a training document changed the shape of the thing. Training documents didn't exist for accidents. Training documents existed for systems. "Who wrote it?" he asked. "The service director. A man named Dennis Colburn." A beat. "You know him?" "I know who he is," Liam said. He did. He'd interacted with Colburn a handful of times at Hargrove. Not closely, not personally. Colburn was the kind of manager who was very good at being unavailable. He scheduled meetings he didn't attend, delegated accountability downward, made sure there were always layers between himself and any uncomfortable outcome. When Liam had filed his compliance reports 2 years ago, Colburn had never once responded directly. Everything had been routed through SUSE, through Krebs, through channels designed to diffuse and delay. "He's still employed there?" Liam asked. "As of this morning, yes," Sophia said. "But the manufacturer has formally notified Hargrove that Colburn's continued employment is inconsistent with the franchise standards. They've given Hargrove 5 business days to demonstrate remedial action, which means they fire him or lose the franchise." In simplified terms, yes. Liam stared at the work light. It had a small crack in the housing that he kept meaning to replace. The crack had been there since March. "There's one more thing in the audit," Sophia said, "and I want to be careful about how I say this, because I don't have the full picture yet." A pause. "The audit team found that TSB-2021-1194, the original one, the one you flagged, was acknowledged internally by Hargrove's service department in September of that year. They received the bulletin, they logged the receipt, and then they created an internal classification that marked it as low priority, no proactive action required." "They knew," Liam said. "They knew," she said. "And the date on the internal classification is 6 weeks before your first email to SUSE." He sat with that. 6 weeks before he'd raised his hand and said something is wrong here, they had already decided what to do about it. Nothing. And when he'd kept raising his hand, they'd removed him. "The classification decision," he said. "Who signed off on it?" "The document was approved by 2 people," Sophia said. "Derek Souza and Dennis Colburn." The shop was very quiet. Outside, a car went by slowly on the street, bass from its stereo thumping through the walls and then fading. "Okay," Liam said. "I know that's a lot to take in." "It is," he said. "But it's not surprising. That's the part that's hard to explain. It's not surprising, which almost makes it worse. Because if it had been a shock, I could tell myself I'd misread the situation. But I didn't misread anything. I read it exactly right, and they fired me anyway." Sophia was quiet for a moment. "For what it's worth, every person who's looked at your documentation has said the same thing. You were right,
You were thorough, and you were ignored. I know, he said. That's the part that kept me up for 6 months. He went home. He made dinner, just soup from a can. He didn't have the mental energy for anything requiring more than heat and a spoon, and ate it at the kitchen table. And Maya came out of her room and sat with him without being asked, which she sometimes did when she sensed he needed company without knowing how to say so. She brought her library book and read while he ate, and neither of them talked much, and it was fine. It was enough. He was washing the bowl when she said from the table, "Daddy, is the thing you're working on going to be okay?" "I think so," he said. "But you don't know for sure." "No," he said. "Not for sure." She turned a page of her book. "My teacher says that's what courage is. Doing something when you don't know how it's going to turn out." He turned around from the sink. She was looking at her book, not at him. "Your teacher's pretty smart," he said. "She's okay," Maya said, with the precise diplomatic assessment of a 7-year-old trying to be fair. "She gives a lot of homework." He dried his hands and went to bed at 10, and for the first time in a few weeks, he slept through until his alarm. The formal meeting that Sophia had threatened in the conference room, the one where both sides would sit down with documentation and reach some kind of understanding about what came next, was scheduled for a Thursday morning, 4 weeks after the AG inquiry opened. Sophia's legal team had negotiated the terms. Neutral location, no attorneys from Hargrove's side making presentations without prior document disclosure, and the right to bring technical witnesses. Liam was the technical witness. He prepared the way he'd prepared for the first meeting, except this time the preparation took 3 days instead of 2 evenings, because the scope was larger. 38 vehicles, 5 TSBs, a training document he'd been given a redacted copy of, the manufacturer's audit summary, his own records from the 8 Meridian executives, all of it organized into a coherent technical narrative that a non-technical person could follow. He worked on it at the kitchen table after Maya went to bed, 3 nights in a row. He got takeout both Wednesday nights because he didn't want to stop working to cook, and Maya, who normally had opinions about takeout, accepted the Thai food on night 1 and the pizza on night 2 without complaint, which told him she understood something large was happening even if she didn't have all the specifics. On the second night, she stood in the kitchen doorway in her pajamas at 9:15 and said, "Are you fighting someone?" He looked up from the laptop. "Kind of." "Are they bigger than you?" "In some ways," he said. She nodded slowly, processing this. "Are you going to win?" "I don't know," he said. "But I've got good material." He caught her expression and added, I know. That's not really an answer." "You should sleep more," she said. "You make better decisions when you sleep." "When did you become a doctor?" "I read it in a book," she said, without embarrassment. She went back to bed. He kept working. The morning of the meeting, he drove downtown in the early dark, parked in a garage that cost $18 he'd budgeted for, and walked 2 blocks to the building where the meeting was being held. A law firm's conference space, rented neutral ground, 12 floors up and well lit in the particular sterile way of rooms designed to hold difficult conversations without giving anything away. He was the first to arrive on his side. Voss came in 5 minutes later, then 2 attorneys from Sophia's firm, whose names he kept mixing up. Sophia arrived at 8:58, 2 minutes before the scheduled start, in a coat that was better than anything in his closet and an expression that was set and deliberate. She stopped when she saw him briefly. "You sleep at all?" "Some," he said. "You look like you had some," she said, which was honest and he appreciated it. Hargrove's contingent arrived at 9:04. Not dramatically late, but late enough that it felt intentional. Patterson was there. Krebs from legal. 3 attorneys who arranged themselves at the far end of the table with the practiced ease of people who spent their professional lives in rooms exactly like this one. And a 4th person Liam didn't recognize, a woman in her late 40s or early 50s with sharp eyes and a posture that suggested she was accustomed to rooms where things were decided. Sophia's attorney, the taller of the 2, whose names Liam kept mixing up, made introductions. The unknown woman was named Olivia Vance. She was, the attorney explained, the newly appointed CEO of Hargrove Automotive Group's parent company. She'd been in the role for 11 days. Liam watched Patterson's face when Vance's title was announced. Something moved across it that was complicated. Relief, possibly,
mixed with the particular exhaustion of a man who knew he was no longer the highest authority in the room.
The meeting opened with Hargrove's lead attorney delivering what was essentially a prepared statement. The company took the concerns seriously, was cooperating fully with all relevant inquiries, was committed to customer satisfaction, was conducting a thorough internal review. It was careful language. It said everything and nothing. Sophia waited until he finished. Then she looked at Olivia Vance directly, not at the attorneys, not at Patterson, and said, "I'd like to hear from you, not the prepared statement. What's actually happening inside your company right now, and what are you going to do about it?" A brief pause. One of Hargrove's attorneys started to interject. Vance stopped him with a single slight raise of her hand. "I've been in this role 11 days, Vance said. Her voice was even and direct. "I've spent 10 of those 11 days in your service records and our internal communications." She paused. "What I found was worse than what I was told when I took the job. I want to be clear about that because I think it matters. I didn't come into this situation with full information, and the people who gave me partial information will answer for that internally." The room was very still. "I'm not here to defend what happened," Vance continued. "I'm here because the path forward requires someone with the authority to make decisions, and I'm that person now." She looked at Sophia. "What do you need?" It was Liam's turn. He opened the laptop. He'd thought, walking through the building lobby that morning, about what the meeting needed to accomplish. The goal wasn't to relitigate the firing. It wasn't about him. The goal was to create a framework that produced outcomes for the 38 people, and whoever else turned up in the full records, who'd paid for something they hadn't needed. Everything else was secondary. He walked the room through the technical evidence the same way he always did, methodically, without editorializing, in an order that built from simple to complex. The fuse, the failure mode, the TSB, the diagnostic process, the repair, the post-repair data. He showed the scanner readings before and after on each of the 8 vehicles he'd worked on. He showed the manufacturer's own confirmation of the repair methodology. Then he put up the training document. He'd been given the redacted version. Certain names and identifying details had been removed per legal protocols. But the substance was intact. The language coaching. The terminology designed to make a fuse problem sound like systemic electronic failure. The guidance on presenting estimates in a way that made customers feel resistance was futile. He read 2 passages aloud because he thought they deserved to be heard in a room. He didn't editorialize, he just read them. When he finished, he looked up. Olivia Vance was looking at the screen with an expression that was hard to read. Not shock exactly, because she'd presumably seen the document before. More like the expression of someone watching something that was already real to them become publicly, formally real. Patterson was looking at the table. "The document was authored by Dennis Colburn," Liam said. "The internal audit confirms that the decision not to implement TSB-2021-1194 was approved by Derek Souza and Dennis Colburn in September of that year. And the formal compliance reports I submitted through internal channels during my employment were reviewed and dismissed by the same individuals." He paused. "I was terminated 6 weeks after filing my final report." He closed the laptop. The room stayed quiet. Voss spoke next, laying out the 19 customers who had agreed to be represented, the documentation of each repair, the gap between what was charged and what the repair should have cost. The total across those 19 cases alone was $214,000 in potentially unjustified charges. Hargrove's lead attorney said, carefully, that the company's position would need to be determined through a formal review process. Olivia Vance said, "We'll provide full service records to the AG's office without requiring a subpoena, all records 36 months, and I'm authorizing a full internal audit beyond what the manufacturer has already completed. Whatever we find, it goes to the AG's office as well." One of her own attorneys said something quietly in her ear. She listened, then said, "I know. Do it anyway." She looked at Sophia. "I want to propose a restitution framework. Independent auditor, not affiliated with Hargrove or with your firms. They review every service record against the TSB database. Any case where the documented fault was consistent with the TSB identified issue and the TSB repair wasn't performed, the customer gets a full refund plus interest. No litigation required to access it. They contact the auditor. They submit documentation. They get their money back." Sophia looked at her attorney. Her attorney looked at Voss. Voss made a note. What about Colburn? Sophia asked. He's been suspended pending the internal investigation, Vance said. I expect that suspension to become permanent before the end of the week. She paused. And Derek Souza is on administrative leave as of this morning. Liam Parker, Sophia said. His employment record at Hargrove. The termination. A pause. Vance looked at Liam. He looked back. The termination will be reclassified, Vance said. It was retaliatory. I won't pretend otherwise. That reclassification will be formal and it'll be in writing, and it will be provided to any future employer or licensing body that inquires. She paused. I recognize that doesn't undo 2 years, but it's what I can do. Liam nodded. He didn't say anything for a moment. He'd thought, walking into this room, about what he'd feel if it went well. He'd expected something cleaner. Vindication, maybe, the kind that movies made look simple and immediate. What he actually felt was more complicated. There was relief somewhere in there, and something tired. And underneath both of those, something steady and unglamorous that was really just the knowledge that he'd done what he came to do. Thank you, he said. It wasn't much, but it was what he had. The meeting continued for another 90 minutes, attorneys talking in the careful language of people building legal frameworks from provisional agreements. Liam answered questions when asked, clarified technical points, provided document references from his folder. He drank 2 cups of conference room coffee that tasted like it had been brewed before he arrived. At one point, during a break, he found himself standing at the window with Sophia, looking down at the street below. 11 floors down, the city was moving in its ordinary way, people in coats, cabs, a delivery truck double-parked with its hazards on. She gave more than I expected, Sophia said quietly. She meant Vance. She's new, Liam said. She's got a chance to define what the company is going to be. Defending the indefensible would define it wrong. You think she actually means it? The restitution framework? I think she means it today, he said. Whether it survives contact with the lawyers and the accountants over the next few months is a different question. Sophia looked at him. That's a realistic answer. I've been trying to be realistic, he said. Optimism hasn't always served me well. She looked back out the window. It got you here. He thought about that. Maybe. Not maybe, she said. You kept that folder for 2 years. That's not pessimism. He didn't answer right away. Below them, the delivery truck finally pulled away from the curb, and a cab immediately claimed the space. My daughter told me courage is doing something when you don't know how it's going to turn out, he said. Sophia was quiet for a moment. Then, she sounds like someone worth listening to. She really is, he said. She also gives better feedback on my PowerPoints than anyone I've ever worked with. Sophia laughed. It was the same short, sharp sound from the first phone call. Genuine, slightly surprised, like laughter that arrived before she'd decided to allow it. The break ended. They went back to the table, and the attorneys resumed, and Liam sat in his chair and listened and answered when he needed to. And the meeting ground toward its conclusions through the careful, imperfect machinery of people trying to fix something that should never have been broken. He left the building at 12:45. He had a 1 o'clock appointment at the shop, a woman's Honda with a coolant leak that Marcus had triaged the previous day and left for Liam because the access was difficult and Marcus's arms weren't quite long enough to reach the relevant hose fitting without a ratchet extension they apparently didn't own. He'd ordered the extension 2 days ago, and it was sitting on the workbench. He had 20 minutes if he didn't get caught at lights. He walked fast. He made it back to the shop at 1:03. The Honda was already pulled into the bay, and the woman who owned it, a nurse named Patricia, who worked nights at a hospital on the west side and needed the car the way working people needed their cars, not as a convenience but as the physical mechanism by which her life functioned, was sitting in one of the 2 plastic chairs in the waiting area, drinking coffee from a paper cup she'd apparently brought herself, scrolling her phone with the focused patience of someone who was used to waiting and had decided to make the best of it. Mr. Parker, she said, looking up. Marcus said you were at a meeting. I was, he said. Sorry for the delay. I'll get right on it. No rush, she said, which was the thing people said when there was actually some rush, but they were being polite about it. He noted it and moved faster. The coolant leak turned out to be worse than Marcus had assessed. Not dramatically worse, not catastrophically worse, but the kind of worse that meant an extra 40 minutes and a second hose that had been on its way to failure for long enough that leaving it while he was in there would have been irresponsible. He replaced both, pressure tested the system, found it clean, topped off the coolant, and had Patricia's Honda back to her by 3:15 with a written explanation of everything he'd done and why. She read the explanation carefully, which most people didn't bother to do. "Both hoses?" she said. "The second one was going anyway," he said. "I'd rather do it now than have you back here in 6 weeks." She looked at the invoice. She looked at him. "Marcus said you're the one who found the problem with those fancy SUVs, the ones that were overbilled. Word traveled, apparently, in his own shop. That's a loose way to describe it. He said you fixed 8 cars for $100 that a dealership wanted $200,000 for. $112, he said, and it was parts only." She studied him for a moment with the particular assessing look of someone who spent her professional life reading people in high-stress situations. "Good," she said simply. She paid, thanked him, and drove away. Marcus appeared from behind a pickup truck he'd been doing a brake job on. "She tip you?" "No, she should have." He went back to the brakes. The rest of the afternoon was quiet enough that Liam's mind kept drifting back to the conference room. To Olivia Vance saying, "We'll provide full records without requiring a subpoena." To the moment one of Hargrove's own attorneys had started to object, and she'd stopped him with a gesture. To Patterson looking at the table while Liam read the training document aloud. He kept landing on the training document. Not on the anger of it. He'd processed most of the anger over the last few weeks in the way he processed things slowly and without announcement, usually while he was working. What kept catching him was the specificity of it. Whoever had written those talking points had thought hard about them, had understood that the gap between what a customer knew and what a technician knew was a space that could be profitably occupied, had written instructions for occupying it. That wasn't sloppiness. That wasn't cutting corners out of laziness. That was deliberate architecture. He locked up at 6, drove home, and found Maya at the kitchen table with her homework again. Fractions, still, which seemed to be a recurring theme of second grade, and Mrs. Okafor on the couch with a cup of tea, watching a game show with the sound low. "She let herself in," Maya said, without looking up from her worksheet. "I told her she could." "That's fine," Liam said. He looked at Mrs. Okafor. "You didn't have to stay." "I know," Mrs. Okafor said pleasantly. "The show I wanted to watch starts in 10 minutes anyway." She nodded toward Maya. "She's been working on those fractions for an hour. She's getting them right, but she won't believe me." "They look wrong," Maya said. "They look right," Mrs. Okafor said. "But they look wrong," Maya said, with the reasonable tone of someone who understood this wasn't actually a counter-argument, but felt it was important to say. Liam made dinner while Mrs. Okafor watched her show, and Maya eventually finished the fractions. It was a normal evening in a way that felt almost pointed. The contrast between the conference room and this kitchen was almost too stark to sit with comfortably. He was glad for it anyway. After Maya was in bed and Mrs. Okafor had gone home and the apartment was quiet, he sat at the kitchen table with his laptop and a list of things he needed to follow up on. He had a message from Voss confirming the framework Vance had proposed was being drafted into a formal agreement. He had a message from Sophia's assistant asking about his availability for a call Thursday morning. He had 3 voicemails from numbers he didn't recognize that he'd deal with tomorrow. And he had a message from a man named Ray Tillman. He almost missed it. It had come in through the shop's website contact form, which he checked maybe twice a week and which was mostly used by people asking if he could take a quick look at something for free. The subject line said, "I think I might be one of the people from Hargrove." He opened it. Ray Tillman had owned a 2021 Meridian Executive. He'd sold it 4 months ago after paying Hargrove's service department $9,800 to replace electronic modules that he'd been told had suffered cascading system failure. He'd sold the vehicle partly because he couldn't shake the feeling that it was a lemon despite the repairs, and partly because the repair bill had cleaned out most of what he'd had in savings. He'd seen something online, he didn't explain exactly what, that mentioned the investigation, and he'd found the shop's website, and he'd sent the message not because he expected anything from it, but because he needed to tell someone who might actually understand what had happened to him. "I know it's probably too late for me,"
he wrote at the end. The car's gone and I don't have documentation of the original diagnosis anymore. I just want to know if what they told me was true. Was there really something wrong with it, or did they make it up? Liam read the message twice. He typed back, Mr. Tillman. It wasn't made up. The symptoms were real. The fault was real. The diagnosis of what was causing those symptoms is what was wrong. I can't tell you with certainty about your specific vehicle without examining it, but the pattern you're describing is consistent with what I found in every vehicle I looked at. You weren't imagining a problem. You were given the wrong solution to a real problem and charged accordingly. Please contact Andrea Voss. Her contact information is below. Even if documentation is limited, you may still have options. He sent it and sat for a moment. Then he forwarded the message to Voss with a note. Another one. He sold the vehicle, limited documentation. Not sure what the path is for him, but thought you should know he exists. Voss responded 12 minutes later, which told him she was also working late. Thanks. He's not the only one in that situation. We're working on a documentation waiver process for cases where the customer no longer has the vehicle. It won't recover everything, but it's better than nothing. He closed the laptop at 10:30. He didn't feel like anything in particular. Not elated, not deflated, just the steady, unremarkable feeling of having done what needed doing for one more day. The formal restitution agreement was signed 3 weeks after the meeting on a Tuesday afternoon at the AG's office in a room that was smaller and less impressive than Liam had imagined AG offices to be. Fluorescent lights, laminate furniture, a dying plant in the corner that nobody had apparently been assigned to water. He wasn't required to be there for the signing, but Voss invited him, and he went. The agreement established the independent auditor framework Vance had proposed. All Hargrove service records for the relevant vehicle models over 36 months would be reviewed against TSB databases. Affected customers would receive full refunds plus 8% interest. The total estimated liability, based on preliminary record review, was between $1.2 and $1.6 million. Hargrove's parent company had agreed to fund the restitution from operating reserves. Dennis Colburn's employment had been terminated 6 days after the meeting. The termination was framed in the official announcement that Hargrove's PR department released as part of a leadership realignment to strengthen service department oversight. Nobody used the word fraud. The word fraud was sitting in the AG's complaint, however, in formal legal language that would take considerably longer to resolve, but would not disappear. Derek Sousa had resigned while on administrative leave. His attorney had released a statement saying his client denied any wrongdoing. His client's denial was a thing that existed in the world alongside the documents that said otherwise. Liam read about both of these developments in an article that Sophia texted him from a local business news site. Short, factual, the kind of coverage that would be read by a specific audience and forgotten by most of them by the following week. He read it during a lunch break, sitting in the office with a sandwich, and then he put his phone down and went back to work. Marcus read the same article and came into the office holding his phone like evidence. "It doesn't say your name," he said. "You fixed the whole thing and your name's not in it." "My name's in the AG complaint," Liam said, "as a technical witness." "That's not the same as being in the article." "No," Liam agreed. Marcus looked at him with an expression that was trying to work out whether this bothered Liam more than he was letting on. "Does that bother you?" Liam thought about it honestly. "Not as much as you'd think," he said. "The article's about the company and the investigation. I'm the mechanic who fixed 8 cars. Those aren't the same story. But without you fixing the cars, there's no investigation. Without Sophia calling me instead of signing the paperwork, there's no investigation either," Liam said. "Without whoever gave her my number. Without the guy who filed the original TSB at the manufacturer years ago. Without 38 people who trusted a service department and got taken advantage of and didn't disappear quietly." He shrugged. "It's a chain. I was a link." Marcus stared at him. "You're a weird dude," he said finally. "Probably," Liam said. "Go finish the Jeep." Marcus went. Liam finished his sandwich. It was a decent sandwich, turkey, Swiss, the good mustard that Marcus had started keeping in the mini fridge, which Liam had initially complained about because the mini fridge was for automotive fluids and now quietly appreciated. The Thursday call with Sophia happened at 8 in the morning before the shop opened. He sat in his truck in the parking spot behind the shop. It had become his default location for calls that required focus. The combination of enclosed space and enough ambient noise from the street to keep him grounded.
Sophia called it 8 exactly. The restitution framework is moving, she said. The auditor's office has been established. The intake process is live. Voss is sending information packets to all 47 customers they've identified so far. 47 now. The records review turned up more cases than the initial cross-reference, she said. They'll keep finding more as they get deeper into the database. The auditor thinks the final number might be over 60. A pause. Ray Tillman is on the list. The documentation waiver process is covering his case. Liam leaned back against the headrest. Outside, the alley was gray and cold, a faint frost on the dumpster lids. Good.
I need to talk to you about something else, Sophia said. Her voice had shifted slightly, less the transactional efficiency of her business tone, something a little more deliberate beneath it. Okay?
My company has 8 vehicles that you've maintained. They've run without issues for 6 weeks post-repair. My fleet manager has submitted a formal assessment. A pause. He recommends we bring you on as our primary fleet maintenance provider. All 8 vehicles, scheduled maintenance, priority service, the whole arrangement. Liam was quiet for a moment. That's a significant contract for a shop my size. I know what size your shop is, she said. I've been there. You've been here?
I came by 2 weeks ago, she said, with a matter-of-fact quality that suggested she'd expected to need to disclose this at some point, and had decided now was the moment. Early afternoon on a Wednesday. You were under a truck and Marcus was at the front, and I didn't want to interrupt your day, so I walked around the front window and looked in for about 2 minutes and left. A pause. I wanted to see what I was working with. And you were completely absorbed in what you were doing, and Marcus was doing the same, and the work looked like it was being done correctly and carefully. A pause. That's what I needed to see. He turned that over. You could have just asked for a reference. References are curated, she said. I wanted to see the actual thing. He thought about what the shop had looked like on a Wednesday afternoon 2 weeks ago. The flickering fluorescent. He'd finally gotten the replacement bulb in 3 days ago, and the satisfaction of the steady light had been disproportionately large. Gerald's truck had been there, he thought. The Subaru with the differential problem. Marcus's music from the Bluetooth speaker. The perfectly ordinary Tuesday-adjacent existence of a small shop doing its work. The contract? He said. What does it cover? She gave him the specifics. Scheduled maintenance on all 8 vehicles at manufacturer-recommended intervals. Priority response for any mechanical issues. His shop would be the first call, with a 4-hour response window. An annual rate structured around projected service needs, paid quarterly. He did the math in his head, the rough version first. Even rough, it was more than the shop cleared in 3 months. Steady, predictable, the kind of income that allowed for hiring a second technician or finally replacing the aging lift that had developed a hydraulic stutter, or keeping the lights on without the particular anxiety of a slow week in February when nobody brought their car in because nothing was visibly wrong yet. I want to be straight with you, he said. I can handle 8 vehicles. The scheduling works. But if this leads to more, if your company expands the fleet, or if you recommend me to other clients, I need lead time to scale. I can't promise a 4-hour response window if I'm doing it alone. That's a reasonable thing to say, she said. I don't want to overpromise and underdeliver, he said. I did that once, early on, when I was trying to keep the shop afloat. I told a client I could turn around a job in a day, and it took 3. He never came back, and he was right not to. Noted, she said. We'll build scaling provisions into the contract. If the fleet expands beyond a threshold you define, the response window adjusts. Okay, he said. Then, yeah, send me the draft and I'll have someone look at it. He thought for a second. I don't actually have an attorney on retainer. Voss will review it, Sophia said. She offered. She offered? She said, and I'm quoting, the man has been providing technical work for free to this investigation for 2 months. The least I can do is read a contract. A pause. She's not wrong. Liam looked at the frost on the dumpster lid. It had started to melt at the edges, the thin ice going transparent and soft in the December morning. Tell her I appreciate it, he said. Tell her yourself, Sophia said. She'd like to hear it from you. They talked for a few more minutes about logistics, timeline for the contract, which vehicles would come in first, a practical conversation about scheduling around the shop's existing client base. It was businesslike and specific, and Liam found, in the middle of it,
that he was taking notes on a notepad he'd grabbed from the console, actual written notes in his cramped, difficult handwriting, because this was real enough to write down. Before she hung up, Sophia said, "One more thing. There's going to be an event, not a formal thing, more of an acknowledgement. The AG's office is doing a press briefing about the investigation next month, and they've asked if key parties in the case would be available for a brief comment. Your name is on the list." "My name? You're the technical expert of record," she said. "You identified the fault, you provided the foundational documentation, you testified. Whether you want to be public about that is your choice. They won't force it. But if you're willing, it matters for the customers. It matters for people to see that this was found by someone who knew what he was doing and wasn't willing to let it go." He thought about Patricia, the nurse, reading his service notes carefully, about Helen Marsh's voice going rough on the phone when she understood she'd been taken, about Ray Tillman sending a message through a website contact form, not because he expected help, but because he needed someone to tell him he hadn't been imagining things. "Yeah," he said. "I'll be there." He opened the shop at 8:30. Marcus arrived at 8:45 with 2 coffees from the place down the block, which he did 3 or 4 times a week on no particular schedule, and handed one to Liam without ceremony. "Anything exciting?" Marcus asked. "Sophia Sterling's company is signing a fleet contract," Liam said. Marcus stopped walking. He turned around slowly. "How big?" 8 vehicles to start. Quarterly payment. Possible expansion." Marcus looked at him for a long moment, working through the math with the expression of someone who understood what the shop's margins looked like and what a steady quarterly payment would mean against those margins. Liam, that's huge." "It's significant," Liam said. "That's huge," Marcus repeated, with the emphasis of someone who felt the first word hadn't been strong enough. "We can get the second lift fixed, or the new alignment rack. You've been talking about the alignment rack for 8 months. Don't spend it before I've read the contract." Right. Marcus resumed walking toward the bay, then stopped again. "Can I ask, is this because of the Hargrove thing? Like, is this her way of—" "No," Liam said. "It's because the fleet manager evaluated the repairs and recommended the shop. It went through a proper vetting process." "But the Hargrove thing started it." "Sure," Liam said. "A lot of things start things." Marcus nodded slowly, absorbing this, and went to his workstation. Liam heard him, about 30 seconds later, mutter something that sounded like alignment rack in a tone of private satisfaction. The next several weeks moved in a rhythm that Liam hadn't felt in the shop before. The rhythm of something expanding rather than just sustaining. The fleet contract was signed on a Friday afternoon, Voss having reviewed and returned it in 2 days with 3 minor suggested revisions, all of which Sophia's office accepted without debate. The first scheduled maintenance appointments for the Meridian executives began the following Monday. He hired a part-time technician named Darnell, 23 years old, a recent graduate of a vocational program who had exactly the right combination of humility and aptitude. He knew enough to do the work, and not enough yet to be overconfident, which was Liam's preferred starting point because overconfidence was the thing you had to break before you could build anything solid. Darnell arrived on his first day with his own set of hand tools wrapped in a roll of leather that he'd clearly been collecting piece by piece, and Liam recognized the particular pride of someone who'd worked for each one and treated them accordingly. He explained the shop's approach on Darnell's first morning. "We don't recommend repairs that aren't needed," he said. "If a customer comes in with 6 things wrong and 2 of them are urgent, we tell them about all 6 and we prioritize. We don't manufacture urgency. We don't upsell fear." He paused. "You'll make less money in individual transactions. Over time, you'll have customers who come back because they trust you, and that's worth more." Darnell nodded, a little formally, the way people nod when they're being told something they're going to need to understand through experience rather than just hearing. "Also," Liam said, "the fluorescent in Bay 2 sometimes flickers. It's not the bulb. It's the ballast. I've ordered the part, but it's back-ordered. If it bothers you, there's a work light on the hook." "I'm good," Darnell said. "Good," Liam said. "There's a Civic with a brake squeal that came in this morning. Start there." 2 weeks after Darnell started, Liam came in on a Tuesday morning and found Marcus at the front of the shop with a measuring tape and a notebook, carefully documenting the dimensions of the space adjacent to the main bay. A storage room that had never been organized properly, that housed 3 years of accumulated parts boxes and old equipment and a defunct tire machine that Liam kept meaning to scrap. "What are you doing?" Liam asked. "Checking if we could fit a third bay in here if we cleared it out," Marcus said, without looking up from his measuring. "We don't have a third lift." "We will," Marcus said, with the certainty of someone who had decided to believe in a thing before the evidence fully supported it. "The alignment rack is already ordered. The third lift is next." Liam looked at the storage room, the defunct tire machine, the boxes, the 3 years of accumulated everything. "You'd have to move all of that," he said. "I know," Marcus said. "I was going to ask Darnell to help. Saturday, if you want to open the shop." He thought about it. He thought about what the shop had looked like 18 months ago. One bay fully operational, one bay functioning as overflow and storage, Marcus working too many hours for too little money because Liam couldn't afford more, the numbers in the negative in February and March, and barely positive in the good months. He thought about the folder in the desk drawer. About 8 black SUVs lined up in his lot, one after another, fixing clean for $14 each. "Order the Saturday," he said. "I'll be here." Marcus made a note in his notebook and went back to measuring. The press briefing from the AG's office happened on the 3rd Thursday of December, in a room with cameras and reporters and the particular uncomfortable energy of a formal public statement. Liam arrived in the same jacket he'd worn to both previous meetings. He needed to buy a better jacket. He'd been thinking this for 2 months and kept not doing it, and stood at the back of the room until Voss found him and walked him to the area reserved for the parties in the case. Sophia was there. She looked, as always, like she had been professionally prepared for exactly this environment. She saw him across the room and gave him a brief nod, the kind that meant, "You're here. Good." The AG's spokesperson, a woman named Diana Cole, who spoke with the steady cadence of someone who had given many of these briefings and understood exactly how much to say and how much to leave unsaid, laid out the facts of the investigation in clean, factual language. The systematic misrepresentation. The 31 vehicles initially identified, now 63 as the full records came in. The total restitution amount, now confirmed at $1.4 million. The terminations. The regulatory action. The restitution intake process that was already open and had received 41 customer applications in its first 9 days. She mentioned Liam once by name as the independent technician whose diagnostic work had identified the fault and whose prior documentation had provided the foundational evidence for the investigation. He didn't make a statement. He'd been asked if he wanted to and had said no, that Cole's summary was sufficient, and he didn't need to add to it. What he did do was stand in the room while questions were answered, present and visible, because Sophia had been right that it mattered for people to see that this had been found by someone specific, someone real, not by a regulatory process that had generated itself from thin air. A reporter found him afterward, near the door. "Mr. Parker," the reporter said. He was young, maybe 25, with a recorder held out, and the eager energy of someone who had not yet had the eagerness fully trained out of him. "Can I ask, when you first looked at those vehicles, did you know what you were going to find?" Liam thought about standing in his bay with the scanner running, watching the codes come in. The 11 codes across 4 modules. The way it looked at first glance, like chaos. "No," he said. "I knew the obvious answer was probably wrong. That's not the same as knowing the right one. And when you found the fuse, when you find the simple answer to a complicated-looking problem," Liam said, "there's maybe 30 seconds where you feel like you missed something, like it can't be that, it's too clean. And then you test it, and it works, and you realize clean is just another word for correct." The reporter was writing. "Do you think this is common? This kind of overdiagnosis, whatever you'd call it?" Liam looked at him. "I think the gap between what a customer knows and what a technician knows is real, and I think most technicians don't exploit it. I think some do, and I think the ones who do are counting on the gap to protect them." He paused. "The best thing a customer can do is ask a second question, not just, is this necessary? But what's the specific cause, and what does the repair address? If the answer gets complicated in a way that shuts you down instead of opening things up, that's worth paying attention to." The reporter nodded, writing fast. "One more. What happens with your shop now, after all this?" Liam looked at the question for a moment. He thought about Marcus and the measuring tape in the storage room, about Darnell and his leather tool roll, about the alignment rack that was being delivered in 2 weeks. "I go back to work," he said. "I've got a Jeep with a suspension issue that I've been meaning to get to all week." The reporter smiled, slightly confused by the answer and not sure if he should be. Liam thanked him and left. Outside, December had settled into the city with the particular commitment of a Chicago winter that had decided to be serious about itself. The wind off the lake had teeth. He turned up his collar and walked toward the parking garage and thought about nothing in particular, just the cold and his feet on the pavement and the parking ticket in his jacket pocket, and the Jeep with the suspension issue, and the fact that he needed to stop somewhere and get Maya a better pair of winter boots because hers had developed a leak in the left toe that she'd mentioned twice with the diplomatic understatement of a kid who didn't want to seem like she was asking for something. He got in his truck, started it, let it warm up for a minute because the heater took a minute, and he'd learned not to rush it. He thought about the folder that had lived in his desk drawer for 2 years. It wasn't there anymore. He transferred it to Voss's office as part of the case documentation, and what was left in the drawer was a photocopy she'd made for his records, thinner than the original, lighter. The desk drawer felt different without the weight of it. Not empty, just different. He pulled out of the parking garage into the December street and headed south, toward the shop, toward whatever was waiting. The Jeep's suspension issue turned out to be a worn stabilizer bar link on the front passenger side. A $40 part, an hour of labor, the kind of repair that felt almost insultingly simple after everything that had preceded it. Liam finished it the morning after the press briefing, alone in the bay while Marcus and Darnell handled the oil changes and a brake job that had come in as a walk-in. He installed the link, torqued it to spec, took the Jeep around the block twice, felt the handling come back to something solid and predictable, and drove it back into the bay. He wrote up the ticket. He thought, this is what the work actually is. $40 and an hour. It's either right or it isn't. He'd been thinking a lot over the last several weeks about what made a thing either right or not. Not philosophically. He didn't have much patience for abstraction as a category. More practically. The difference between a diagnosis that looked for the correct answer and one that looked for the profitable answer was a choice made at a specific moment by a specific person every single time. It wasn't systemic in the sense of being impersonal. Dennis Colburn had written a document. Derek Souza had signed an approval. Individual people had made individual decisions, repeatedly, over 31 months, each one a small choice to occupy the gap between what they knew and what the customer didn't. The thing Liam kept landing on was that those choices hadn't felt dramatic when they were being made. That was the nature of that kind of corruption. It didn't announce itself. It accumulated. It started as a small thing that worked and became a system because the small thing kept working and nobody with the authority to stop it wanted to. He'd been one person who'd wanted to stop it and hadn't had the authority, so he'd kept a folder instead. He was still thinking about this when his phone buzzed with a text from Sophia. Check your email when you get a chance. The first restitution checks went out this morning. He checked it that evening at the kitchen table after Maya had gone to bed. Voss had CC'd him on a status report. 41 checks issued in the first disbursement, ranging from $4,000 to $14,000 depending on the case. Total disbursed $312,000. The restitution fund had enough to cover all identified cases through the completion of the audit. He scrolled through the status report slowly. 41 names. He didn't know most of them. Helen Marsh was on the list. Her refund was $11,200, the full amount she'd paid with interest. Ray Tillman was on the list, with a notation that his case had been processed under the documentation waiver, a partial refund based on the available evidence. He closed the laptop. He sat in the quiet kitchen. He thought about Helen Marsh hearing the phone ring or getting the email notification and seeing the number. He thought about what $11,000 meant to a person who'd had it taken from them and then gotten it back. Not just the money. The validation that came with it. The formal acknowledgement that the thing they'd suspected was real, that they hadn't been foolish, that they'd been deceived deliberately by people who knew exactly what they were doing. He didn't know Helen Marsh well enough to know what she'd do with it. Probably something practical. Most people, when they got unexpected money back, did something practical with it first, and then something that mattered to them second, and the second thing was usually the more honest indicator of what they actually needed. He hoped she got the second thing too. The winter moved on in the way Chicago winters move, without apology, in increments of gray and cold that occasionally broke into crisp blue days that were beautiful precisely because you'd earned them by surviving the gray. January came, and February came, and the shop was busier than it had ever been in Liam's 18 months of ownership. Part of it was the fleet contract. The Meridian executives came in on a rotating schedule, and the work was straightforward and predictable in the way that scheduled maintenance was satisfying. You knew what you were going to do before you did it. You did it correctly. You documented it. The fleet manager, a precise and detail-oriented man named Claude, who communicated primarily through formatted emails, had told Liam after the third round of service visits that the vehicles were performing better than they had during their time with Hargrove. "That's not a high bar," Liam had said. "It's still true," Claude had said, without apparent irony. Part of the business increase was referral. This was the slower, quieter mechanism by which small shops lived or died. Not advertising, not promotion, but the simple mathematics of someone having a good experience and telling a person they knew. Patricia the nurse had sent 2 colleagues. Gerald had sent 4 people from his landscaping network. A woman whose timing belt Liam had replaced in October had left a detailed review online that had been specific enough about the quality of the work that it read as something a real person had written, which was rarer than it should have been. And part of it, a part Liam was aware of and didn't quite know how to feel about, was the Hargrove story. It had received coverage, modest but real, in local business media and in a consumer automotive publication that had picked up the AG's press briefing as a news item. The coverage mentioned him by name. It described him as the independent technician who'd identified the fault and provided the foundational evidence. For about 2 weeks in January, the shop's phone had rung with people who'd specifically sought him out, who said some version of, "I saw what you did with those SUVs and wanted someone they could trust with their vehicle." He was careful about this. The story had made him visible in a way that felt uncomfortable, not because he was embarrassed by what he'd done, but because visibility invited expectation. An expectation of a specific kind, the expectation of someone who was defined by a single moment rather than by the accumulated ordinary work of every day. He didn't want to be the mechanic from the Hargrove story. He wanted to be the mechanic who fixed your car correctly and told you the truth about what it needed. Those things overlapped, but they weren't the same thing. He said something close to this to Marcus on a slow Tuesday afternoon when Marcus, emboldened by the 3rd cup of coffee he'd had from the good place down the block, brought up the subject directly. "You're not enjoying it," Marcus said. It wasn't quite an accusation and wasn't quite a question. "I'm enjoying the business," Liam said. "I'm not enjoying being a story." "Why not? You did good." "I fixed a fuse," Liam said. "You fixed a fuse and kept a folder for 2 years and went into a room full of lawyers alone and showed them the thing they were hoping you'd lost." Marcus leaned against the workbench. He had a look that was direct and a little impatient, the look of someone who'd decided the person he was talking to was being unnecessarily complicated. "That's not just fixing a fuse." No, Liam agreed. "But I don't want the fuse to be the whole story either. You know what I mean? I don't want to be defined by the one time I got to be right in a visible way. I want to be defined by whether I'm right every single time, including the times when nobody's watching." Marcus was quiet for a moment. He was young enough that he was still in the phase where everything felt like a clear category. Hero or not hero, visible or invisible, important or ordinary. He'd age out of it. Most people did. "You sound like a guy who doesn't know how to take a win," he said finally. "Maybe," Liam said. "Or maybe I just know that the win is the shop running well. The win is Darnell learning how to read a scan tool without someone holding his hand. The win is 63 people getting money back they shouldn't have had to pay in the first place." He paused. "I'm not the win. Those things are the win." Marcus picked up his coffee. "You're still a weird dude," he said. "You keep saying that," Liam said. "Go check on the alignment rack. It was making a noise this morning." The second ratchet extension he'd ordered for Marcus arrived the same week the third bay became operational. The storage room had been cleared on a Saturday in January. Marcus, Darnell, Liam, and Mrs. Okafor's nephew, who'd been recruited under circumstances Liam didn't fully understand. And what emerged from under the accumulated years of boxes and defunct equipment was a space that was larger than Liam had remembered. The third lift had been ordered in February,
and installed by a crew that took 2 full days and left the concrete floor with 3 new anchor bolts and the particular smell of new hydraulic fluid. The first car to go up on the third lift was a 1998 Camry belonging to an 80-year-old man named Vernon who'd been coming to the shop since the beginning and paid in cash, and always brought a bag of hard candy that he left on the front counter for whoever wanted it. His alignment was off, had been for probably a year, Liam suspected, and the new rack made the diagnosis precise in a way the old equipment couldn't have matched. Vernon stood in the waiting area and watched Liam work through the glass partition with the expression of a man who was very old and had seen enough to appreciate competence when he saw it. When the car was done, he paid, pocketed his receipt, and picked up the bag of candy from the counter on his way out. "You expanded," he said, nodding at the third bay. "Trying to," Liam said. "Good," Vernon said. He seemed to regard this as sufficient and left. Sophia called in late February on a Thursday, which had become their default day for calls that required actual conversation rather than quick text updates. "The full audit is complete," she said. "Final count is 71 vehicles. Final restitution total is $1.78 million. Liam sat down. 71. "The last batch of records went deeper than anyone expected," she said. "Some of it goes back further than 30 months. The practice started before the formal training document, apparently. There were some earlier instances that Olivia Vance's team caught in the manual review. Vance's team found them herself. Vance's team found them and disclosed them voluntarily," Sophia said, "to the AG's office and to the auditor." A pause. "She didn't have to do that. The agreement only covered the specified 36-month window. She had discretion to stop there." Liam thought about Vance in the meeting room, stopping her own attorney with a gesture. "I know, do it anyway." "How's the restitution process going?" he asked. 68 of the 71 are in the intake process. 2 couldn't be located. We'll keep trying. 1 is deceased." A pause that was brief, but not nothing. "The estate is being handled separately." He sat with that for a second. Someone who'd paid thousands of dollars for something they didn't need and died before anyone could give it back. He didn't know who that person was. He'd never know who that person was. That was the particular weight of a thing that extended beyond the visible edges of any story. That some of it would never fully resolve, that some of it had already cost people more than money, and that no restitution check could address. "And the criminal side?" he asked. "The AG's office filed criminal fraud charges against Dennis Colburn last week," Sophia said. 2 counts of consumer fraud, 1 count of conspiracy. His attorney is indicating he'll fight it. "Sousa?" "He's cooperating with the prosecution in exchange for reduced charges," she said. "He's provided testimony about the decision-making process, specifically about who authorized what and when. Which leads back to Colburn." "Which leads back to Colburn," she confirmed. "His attorney's argument will be that the advisors exercised independent judgment and he's being scapegoated by a subordinate who made a deal. It won't be a clean case. Fraud cases rarely are." "But it's a case," Liam said. "It's a case," she said, "with your documentation at the center of it." The prosecutor told Voss that the email record you kept is the difference between a case and a strong case. He looked at the wall of his office. The 3-year-old calendar was finally gone. Marcus had taken it down in January and replaced it with a current one from a parts supplier, which had photos of classic cars and was objectively better. The coffee maker had been replaced too, a newer one that didn't leave a burned smell in the room. Small things. The room looked less like a place someone was trying to survive in and more like a place someone had decided to stay. "What about the manufacturer?" he asked. "The franchise situation?" "Hargrove retained the franchise," Sophia said, "under a corrective action plan that Vance negotiated directly with the manufacturer. Mandatory TSB compliance monitoring, quarterly audits, service department restructuring. The franchise stays, but it's on a short leash." She paused. "Some people thought they should lose it outright. I understand that argument, but losing the franchise would put a lot of people who had nothing to do with Colburn's decisions out of work." Vance's argument was that the right outcome punishes the specific actors and reforms the institution, not that it burns the institution down. "You agree with her?" Liam asked. A pause. "Mostly," Sophia said. "I think institutional reform is real when the people driving it have genuine accountability. Vance has it. Her job depends on whether the reform sticks. That's a meaningful incentive. Another pause. I think I'd feel differently if Colburn weren't facing criminal charges. The reform plus the prosecution is the complete picture. The reform without it would have been a cover story. Liam nodded, which was a useless thing to do on a phone call, but he did it anyway. Yeah, he said, that's about where I land too. It occurred to him, not for the first time, how strange it was that he'd come to have these conversations. That a phone call from a stranger about 8 broken cars had deposited him, 6 months later, into conversations about franchise law and prosecutorial strategy and institutional accountability. He was a mechanic. His expertise was in what happened inside engines, what voltage readings meant, why a fuse could bring down a system or restore it. But expertise in one thing he'd learned sometimes created unexpected obligations in adjacent things. He'd found the fuse. That had made him the person who understood why it mattered. Understanding why it mattered had made him the person who could explain it to people who needed to act on it. Each step had been small. The distance traveled had been large. I want to ask you something, he said, and it's not a business question. Okay, Sophia said, with the slight shift in register that meant she was paying a different quality of attention. Why did you stick with it? He asked. All of this. It cost you time and legal fees and attention you could have spent on other things. You got the cars fixed for $112. You could have stopped there. Why didn't you? A pause. Not the quick pause of someone gathering words, but a slower one, the kind that suggested the question had reached something she didn't answer automatically. Honestly, she said, the first reason was selfish. I was angry. Someone tried to take advantage of me because they thought I'd sign without questioning, and that was an assessment of my intelligence that I took personally. She paused. But that gets you to the meeting. That doesn't get you to the AG's office, or to finding 68 people and making sure they have access to restitution. What gets you to that? Helen Marsh, she said, when my team contacted her and she said she'd trusted that dealership for 6 years. Another pause. That's what made it not about me anymore. You can be angry on your own behalf and it burns out. When you understand it happened to 68 people who didn't have the instinct to stop and call someone else, people who just trusted because that's what reasonable people do, that's a different thing. That doesn't burn out. Liam didn't say anything for a moment. Your daughter, Sophia said. How old is she now? 7, he said. Almost 8. What does she think about all of this? Does she know? Bits of it, he said. She knows I was in a fight with someone bigger. She knows it seems to be going okay. He thought about Maya in the kitchen doorway at 9:15 in her pajamas, saying you should sleep more. About the fractions that always looked wrong, even when they were right. About the drawing of the shop she'd made 2 months ago that was still pinned above his workbench. The small building under a clear sky, rendered in crayon with the confident inaccuracy of a child who'd drawn what the place felt like rather than what it looked like. She's handling it the way she handles most things. Better than I would at her age. She sounds grounded, Sophia said. She's 7, he said. She still thinks the rules of games are negotiable if you argue your case strongly enough. Sophia laughed, the short, real one that arrived before she'd decided to allow it. That might be an asset. It's inconvenient right now, he said. Ask me in 20 years. The call ended and Liam sat in the office for a minute before going back to the bay. Darnell was working on a fuel system issue on a Subaru, proceeding carefully and correctly, but with the slight over-deliberateness of someone who knew he was being watched, even when he wasn't being watched. He'd get over that. It took time to develop the ease that came from knowing your own competence, and time was the one thing you couldn't rush. The days after that call had a quality of settling, not resolution in the dramatic sense, not a moment where everything clicked into its final position with a satisfying sound. More like the slow, unglamorous process of things becoming what they were going to be. In March, Andrea Voss called to tell him that his formal complaint record with the state licensing board had been updated to reflect the reclassified termination. The retaliatory discharge was now part of his official employment record, not as a scar, but as a fact, documented and explained. His license, which had never been in jeopardy but had carried the shadow of the firing behind it, was clean in the way it should always have been. How does that feel? Voss asked, with the directness of someone who'd decided she was allowed to ask. He thought about it. Like something being corrected that was wrong, he said. Not exciting, just right. That's usually what justice feels like, she said. Movies make it look like a moment. Usually it's more like paperwork. I know a lot about paperwork, he said. I know, she said. You kept it better than most. In April, 6 months after the first Meridian executive had rolled into his bay, the shop turned a profit that was not marginal. It was not a number that would have impressed anyone who worked in finance or ran a large business, but it was a number that meant he could pay Marcus what Marcus was worth, which was more than he'd been paying him. It was a number that meant Darnell's part-time hours could become full-time hours. It was a number that meant the second lift's hydraulic issue could be properly fixed rather than managed around. It meant, practically, that the thing he'd built on a strip mall lot on the south side of Chicago was alive in a way it hadn't been before. He didn't mark the occasion with anything. He noted it and went to work the next day and the day after that. This was the thing about good news in ordinary life. It didn't stop time. The work was still there. The cars were still there, with their faults and their hidden problems and their diagnostic puzzles that were sometimes simple and sometimes not. The customers still needed things done correctly and truthfully and on time. That didn't change. Nothing about the fundamental requirements of the work changed. He found he was glad about that. One evening in early April, a Thursday, the light lasting longer now, the city letting go of winter in the reluctant, incremental way it always did, Liam was in the office finishing paperwork when he heard Maya's voice from the bay. She'd come with him after school, which she did sometimes when Mrs. Okafor was unavailable. She had a spot at the end of the workbench, a stool, a section of clean space, whatever homework she'd brought. And she worked there with the focused self-containment of a kid who'd grown up around work and understood that the place her father worked was a real place that functioned by real rules, not a place that stopped and attended to her. She was good about it. She'd always been good about it. But she wasn't at the workbench. Her voice was coming from the bay, and Darnell's voice was answering, and Liam walked to the doorway to check. She was standing next to the Camry that Vernon had brought in for its quarterly visit, an oil change and a tire rotation, nothing complicated. And she was asking Darnell questions. "But how do you know which one is broken?" she was saying. "You test them," Darnell said. He had the slightly formal patience of someone who wasn't sure if he was supposed to be having this conversation, but had decided to be helpful anyway. "You check the reading, compare it to what it should be, see where it's off. And if it's off, that's the problem?" "That's the symptom," Darnell said. "The problem is what's causing it to be off." Maya considered this. She had her hands in the front pocket of her hoodie, which was her thinking posture. Like how, when I have a headache, it's not the headache that's the problem, it's something else that's making the headache. Darnell looked at her. "Yeah," he said, with what sounded like genuine appreciation. "Exactly like that." "My dad says that," she said. "He says never fix the symptom if you haven't found the cause." "Your dad's right." She looked at the Camry with the assessing expression she'd been practicing on adult things for most of her life. "Can I see where the oil goes?" Liam stepped back from the doorway before she saw him and went back to the office. He sat down at the desk and looked at the wall where the calendar now showed April, a photograph of a 1967 Mustang Fastback in the kind of condition that only existed in photographs on calendars, and he thought about nothing in particular for a minute. He thought about his own father, briefly, a man who'd worked in a warehouse his whole life, and had the particular quiet dignity of someone who'd done honest work without recognition for decades, and hadn't required the recognition because the work was its own argument. Liam had taken the long way to understand that. He'd spent years at a place that valued the performance of expertise over its substance, and the performance had eventually tried to consume the substance, and he'd lost the job over insisting there was a difference. He'd kept the folder. That was the whole story, really, when you stripped it down. He'd kept the folder because somewhere underneath the anger and the defeat and the pragmatic calculation about when the right moment to use it would be, he'd known that the difference was real, and that the difference mattered, and that someone, eventually, would need to see it. Maya appeared in the office doorway. "Darnell showed me the dipstick," she said. "Good." The oil was really dark. "Vernon doesn't always come in on schedule," Liam said. "We fixed it." She came into the office and sat in the chair across the desk from him, which was the chair that customers sat in, and she sat in it with the slightly formal posture of someone taking a meeting. It made him want to smile, but he kept his face neutral because she would find that condescending. "Are things better?" she asked.
Like, for real. He looked at her. She was almost 8, which was the age where questions stopped being simple and started being the questions they were actually asking. She wasn't asking about the shop's financials. She was asking about the weight she'd felt him carrying for years. The tightness in the shoulders, the late nights, the careful management of what he said and didn't say about money and worry, and the specific exhaustion of being the only safety net for a small person who depended entirely on it. Yeah, he said. For real. She studied him with the unnerving assessment of a child who'd learned to read adults out of necessity. Whatever she found in his face apparently satisfied her, because she nodded once, settled back in the chair, and pulled her homework from the front pocket of her hoodie. I have to do 4-word problems, she said. They're about trains. I'll help if you get stuck. I won't get stuck, she said. They're about trains, not fractions. She opened her notebook. Liam went back to the invoices. The shop was quiet around them. Marcus had left at 5. Darnell was finishing up Vernon's Camry with the methodical, unhurried concentration of someone doing a job right. The overhead lights were steady. All 3 of them, finally, steady. Outside, the April evening was doing something almost kind. The light going gold on the street, longer than it had any right to be after the winter. The city exhaling in the slow, reluctant way of a place remembering it was capable of warmth. Through the front windows, Liam could see the bus stop where a woman stood with a bag of groceries, and the laundromat with its sign half lit, and the ordinary, unremarkable life of the block going about itself without any particular interest in what had happened in conference rooms and AG offices and courtrooms over the last 6 months. That was fine. That was correct, actually. The ordinary life of the block was the point. The cars that kept it running were the point. The 68 people who'd gotten their money back and were now able to use it for something real, rent, groceries, a kid's winter boots, were the point. He was the mechanic. That was the point. He heard Darnell lower Vernon's Camry from the lift with the particular hydraulic sigh of a job completed, and he heard Darnell's voice say something quiet that was probably a self-check, a habit Liam had encouraged, talking yourself through a completed job to make sure nothing was skipped. He heard the lights in the bay click off one section at a time as Darnell shut down for the evening. Maya was writing steadily, her pencil moving in the careful strokes of someone who'd decided to take the word problems seriously. She'd always been like that, all in or not in, no comfortable middle distance. He thought about the drawing she'd made, the small building under the clear sky. He'd pinned it above the workbench on a Tuesday afternoon 6 months ago, and it had stayed there through everything, through the depositions, and the meetings and the calls and the press briefing and the slow accumulation of 71 cases resolved and $1.78 million returned to people who'd been taken from. The crayon colors had faded slightly under the fluorescent light. The cloud she'd drawn above the building, which might have been a cloud or might have been smoke or might have been something she'd invented, was still there, slightly faded, still unidentifiable, still perfectly itself. He didn't know what the next year would look like. He knew what next week looked like. A transmission service, 2 brake jobs, a check engine light on a Kia that Marcus thought was the oxygen sensor, but that Liam suspected was something else entirely, the particular pleasure of finding out which one of them was right. He knew what next month looked like. The fleet contract's second quarterly service cycle, Darnell's first solo diagnostic on a complex case that Liam had been building him toward for 2 months, Marcus's birthday somewhere in the 3rd week for which Liam had already bought a decent torque wrench he'd been wanting. Beyond that, he held it loosely. He'd learned, the hard way, and then the slow way, that certainty about outcomes was a trap. You could do the right thing and get fired for it. You could keep a folder for 2 years with no guarantee it would ever matter. You could fix 8 cars for $112 and not know when you drove home that night if the correct answer would survive contact with the people who preferred the profitable one. What you could control was the quality of the work in front of you, the accuracy of the diagnosis, the honesty of the recommendation, the decision, made fresh every single day, to look for the real answer instead of the convenient one. That was it. That was the whole of it. "Daddy," Maya said without looking up from her notebook. "Yeah. If a train leaves Chicago going east at 60 miles an hour and another train leaves New York going west at 80 miles an hour." She stopped, looked up. "Actually, I got it." "You sure?" She was already writing. "I said I got it." He turned back to his invoices. The shop was quiet, and the light outside was going, and somewhere across the city, 68 people had a little more money than they'd had 6 months ago, and somewhere a 23-year-old named Darnell was in the parking lot getting into his car with a leather tool roll in the trunk, and a better understanding of fuel systems than he'd started the month with. And somewhere Marcus was probably already home thinking about the alignment rack, or the third lift, or the next thing to improve, because Marcus was constitutionally unable to look at a space without thinking about what it could become. And here, in a small office in a shop on the south side of Chicago, a man who was not a hero, and not a whistleblower, and not a symbol of anything larger than himself sat across from his daughter while she solved a math problem about trains, and the invoices added up correctly, and the work had been done right, and that was enough. It had always been enough. He just hadn't always been able to see it.